Part 6. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 51. Musian sat cross-legged on the edge of the bed, absorbing the spiritual energy purified by the chi of heaven while waiting for night to fall. It should be said that it is the product left by the strong men who once ascended to the immortal stage. The bonus brought by the chi of heaven is simply ridiculously strong. It is no wonder that the protagonists become more powerful after getting the golden finger. It's a pity that if you want to speed up your cultivation, you can only do it by Byruoxi's side. After all, this thing recognizes its owner, will not leave its owner's side, and will only purify the owner's aura. Moreover, because of the bonus of the heavenly chi, Byruoxi's absorption of spiritual energy will still be much faster than him. If this progress continues, it may not take long for Byruoxi to reach the peak of chi refining. But after that, she should be stuck at the peak of chi refining for a year and a half. From the chi refining realm to the god refining realm, one cannot advance by just accumulating spiritual energy in the cauldron. It requires one's own insights. Everyone has a different perception of the god refining realm. Wei Mengru's refining of gods is related to her experience as a child, so after entering the realm of refining gods, she has the ability to hide her own aura, making it difficult for enemies of the same level to find her presence. Ren Lao's god refining realm can imprison other people's souls, but that soul is not a living thing, just a remnant soul. As for Musian himself, he is not in a hurry and cannot be in a hurry. After all, he is a good-for-nothing young master. He has been neglected for such a long time, and it is not easy to make up for it. However, after Byruoxi activated the bronze sword that day, Musian began to suspect something. Is Yayu the protagonist, or is Byruoxi the protagonist? Or, after getting rid of the protagonist Yayu, the protagonist also changed, from Yayu to Byruoxi? Anyway, the protagonist is better than the genius young master of the Ye family before. After all, Miss Bai is from his side. And the rouge is delicious too. Musian adjusted his breath and slowly opened his eyes. Byruoxi seemed to have fallen asleep at this moment. She was lying in the dimness, her graceful figure was covered by a thin quilt. The slightly raised arc of the quilt showed the hugeness of the girl's heart. In the dimness, she seemed to be able to see some white snow. Skin color. Musian glanced twice, withdrew his gaze, turned around and quietly opened the door. Just before Byruoxi took a rest, he asked Byruoxi to use the chi of heaven to purify the nearby spiritual energy. The pure spiritual energy has not completely disappeared yet. Likewise, the demonic aura has not completely disappeared. Musian raised his head slightly, saw the evil spirit rising from a certain hut in mid-air, and walked quietly away. He was hiding in the corner by the window of the house just like last time. After waiting patiently for nearly an hour, the door was quietly pushed open. Musian held his breath and saw a plump woman crossing the threshold and walking out of the room. It was late at night, but she was dressed a little thinly, with some light makeup on her face. She walked gracefully in the Bai family's yard. With every step she took, her waist swayed gracefully from side to side. "Mrs. Bai, it's so late, where are you going?" Musian suddenly said. A sudden sound caused Bai Yuanfeng's body to freeze slightly, his steps stopped in place, and he slowly turned his head. When she saw the young man hiding in the shadows, there was a hint of surprise on her face. "Master Mu, when were you at the Bai family? I asked someone to use some secret techniques. As long as I don't have any murderous intention towards you, you won't notice me," Musian said with a smile. Wei Mengru's ability in the divine refining realm is very useful, but the premise is that she cannot have murderous intent on the target she is following. But Musian did not have any murderous intention towards Mrs. Bai. Bai Yuanfeng's eyes flashed slightly, and soon, a charming smile full of charm appeared on the beautiful woman's face, and she said, "Young Master Mu stayed up in the middle of the night and secretly came to my Bai mansion to find my daughter. She walked slowly towards Musian, and finally came to him. Bai Yuanfeng continued, girls don't like to be harassed by others in the middle of the night, so it's better to be more careful. Musian smiled and said, I have been in Ruoxi's room just now. Bai Yuanfeng's smile faltered. After a long time, she said softly, I still approve of the marriage between Ruoxi and you. If you don't mind, I will help you in the future. Is it to place an informant in the Mu family, or to prevent his daughter from being implicated after the truth about being a demon cultivator is revealed? Musian said with a smile. There was a hint of cold luster in Bai Yuanfeng's charming and passionate eyes. Musian explained calmly, calm down, Ruoxi and I were chatting in the room just now. The underlying meaning of this statement is, I may be your future son-in-law, you should consider it before taking action. Bai Yuanfeng stopped laughing, you are really brave to say such things in front of other people's mothers. We really love each other. Musian looked serious. How many people in Tianqian City don't want to truly love my daughter? Bai Yuanfeng snorted. How about we find a place to sit down and talk? Musian asked tentatively. Let's talk here, there is no one else around here. Bai Yuanfeng sighed softly. If you have anything to ask, just ask. Aren't you hiding here just waiting for me to come out? Musian nodded slightly and said, where is Tung Mei pill? You should have heard it from my daughter. Bai Yuanfeng narrowed her eyes, her voice soft and sweet, I gave it to Gongsun Xiong. Musian frowned and said, Gongsun Xiong can't die yet. Why? Bai Yuanfeng pretended to be puzzled, but stared at Musian. She wanted to test Musian to see how smart the young man who was very likely to become her future son-in-law was. If he died, the Gongsun family would immediately introduce a new patriarch. The size of the Bai family cannot swallow the Gongsun family, Musian said. Bai Yuanfeng smiled and said softly, who told you that I wanted to murder Gongsun Xiong? I just let him lie down for a few more months. Gongsun Xiong is at the peak of the spirit refining. After recovering from this serious injury, he will definitely use the Tung Mei pill to fight for a chance to advance to the return to Void Realm. But if the Tung Mei pill was tampered with, then the result would be completely different. Compared with her mother, Bai Ruoxi is as innocent as a little white rabbit. But it just so happens that Musian likes little white rabbits. Moreover, although Bai Ruoxi looks like a little white rabbit, there are also some things about her that are not like little white rabbits. Uncle was ambushed when he came back from the neighboring city that day. Did you provide the information to the Gongsun family? Musian asked. Seeing Bai Yuanfeng nod, Musian frowned and said, aren't you afraid that uncle will be killed by the cultivators of the Gongsun family on the way back? Bai Yuanfeng showed a charming smile on her face, Master Mu, you are indeed a very smart child. I will be relieved if Ruoxi is with you in the future, but, your realm is too low, and you don't understand the true mystery of the realm of refining spirits. Bai Yuanfeng slowly spread out his palm. Musian's eyes condensed slightly, and he suddenly saw a soul in the palm of the beautiful woman. That was the soul of a servant in the Bai mansion, which was just caught by Bai Yuanfeng. She flicked her finger, and the soul quickly flew out and flew back into the servant's body. Sensing Musian's surprised look, Bai Yuanfeng said, I was at the scene at the time. If the master got into trouble, I could immediately take away his soul. This secret method is a bit similar to the old man's, except that Ren Lao's secret method is used to interrogate others, and the souls captured are all dead. However, Bai Yuanfeng's secret method can save people at critical moments, but there should be disadvantages, Musian thought secretly. Bai Yuanfeng is right, he still knows too little about the refining spirit realm. If he knew that some cultivators in the refining spirit realm could take away other people's souls directly, his thinking would be much more active, and he would not have discovered the truth until now. Why did you choose me instead of Yayu for Ruoxi? Musian suddenly asked. Yayu has talent but an arrogant personality. I don't know how many geniuses like him I have seen in the past, and most of them eventually fell in the middle of their careers. Bai Yuanfeng said, "To be honest, I am not satisfied with either you or Ye, but if I have to choose one, the Mu family, as a big backer, makes me feel more at ease." "Are you and Gong Sun Xiang really?" Muzian asked again. Bai Yuanfeng narrowed her eyes slightly and said softly, "What do you think?" Her body was changing, and the shadow behind her was like a peacock spreading its tail, with 3 tails quietly unfolding. Muzian's eyes were slightly fixed. "It's really a demon cultivator, and a 3-tailed fox. No wonder she can disguise herself so well and deceive Gong Sun Xiang to death." Gong Sun Xiang thought he had something to do with Mrs. Bai, but maybe Gong Sun Xiang was just hugging the pillar every night to satisfy himself. And in this case, Bai Ruoxi is the child of a 3-tailed fox and a human? No wonder I couldn't help but stare at Bai Ruoxi's heart before, so that's what happened, Muzian understood slightly in his heart. He thought it was his LSP, but now it seems that it was simply because Bai Ruoxi inherited her mother's charm. Well, it's definitely not his fault. He was a little restless in Bai Ruoxi's boudoir tonight, which must be the fault of the 3-tailed fox. "What are you going to do next?" Muzian asked. "Originally, I planned to annex the Gong Sun family, but the examiner from Lianji sect went down the mountain early." Bai Yuanfeng frowned slightly when she said this. Lan Murian's going down the mountain completely disrupted her plan. Gong Sun Xiang is a person who has an incomparable desire for power. Originally, as long as Gong Sun Xiang had a problem with his body after taking Tong Mei pills, the Bai family would have a chance to take action. Because the Gong Sun family, which is unwilling to give up power, will be a mess in a short time. Even if the Bai family cannot swallow the Gong Sun family, they can still get a lot of wool from the Gong Sun family. But the examiner for the sect assessment is in Tianqian City. If the movement is too loud, it will inevitably attract the attention of the other party. It's not appropriate for the Bai family to make too much noise now, or it will attract the attention of the examiner, Muzian said. Bai Yuanfeng nodded silently. She knew this, so there has been no movement in the past 2 days. But the Mu family can make some noise, Muzian said again. Bai Yuanfeng was slightly startled, and subconsciously said, "Do you want to annex the Gong Sun family?" "I don't have the idea of annexing the Gong Sun family, and I won't have it," Muzian smiled, "but I have the idea of fleecing them, and it's very big." Gong Sun Xiang was reluctant to give up power, but he was seriously injured. If he didn't take this opportunity to slaughter him, when would he wait? Bai Yuanfeng stared at Muzian silently. She worked so hard to lay the groundwork for so long, but ended up giving someone else a dowry, which made her a little unwilling. But then she thought about it. It seemed that this could also be considered as one of the dowries for her daughter in the future. Thinking about it this way, she felt a little better. If Bai Ruoxi and Muzian were together in the future, the Mu family and the Bai family would become relatives, and it seemed that they would not lose anything. "It's a bargain for you, child," Bai Yuanfeng said faintly. Muzian smiled. "Madam Bai is not easy to take over the hot potato. I will help you take it over. This is also a filial piety, isn't it?" Bai Yuanfeng said, "Huh? Why didn't I realize that this playboy from the Mu family was so smart before? Could it be that he was pretending before?" Bai Yuanfeng looked at Muzian. Her beautiful eyes flickered slightly, with a look like looking at her son-in-law. "Madam Bai, there is still one thing I don't understand," Muzian suddenly said. "You go?" Bai Yuanfeng nodded. "Why did the black-robed man know you were in Tianqian City?" Muzian asked. According to Bai's father, Bai Yuanfeng grew up in Tianqian City in the past. Why did the people in the demon world know that there were also his accomplices in Tianqian City? The demon world has been laying spies everywhere for a long time, and I am just one of them. And it was only this year that I received an order from the demon world to prepare a base to meet my companions. Bai Yuanfeng was silent for a moment, and continued, "I don't know the specific situation, but the seventh seat's intelligence network is very large. If it is her intelligence network, it is not surprising that she knows my identity. The seventh seat of the demon world, Musian said to himself. The black-robed man is also, and Bai Yuanfeng is also. It seems that they are all spies of the seventh seat. This is really a bit strange. Tianqian City is not far from the foot of the Lianji section. How can the demon cultivators secretly do things under the nose of the Lianji sect? Could it be that the seventh seat of the demon world is in the sect of the Lianji section? Musian was half joking in his heart. But for some reason, I felt that this was possible. He quickly gathered his thoughts and said, "Mrs. Bai's family is pretty happy. If you want to live a normal life, you should be more cautious in the future." After that, Musian turned and walked towards the gate of Bai's house. He had made his words very clear. If Bai Yuanfeng listened, she should be more restrained in the future. The beautiful woman with the charming figure looked at Musian. The silver moonlight fell on her body. The shadow of her three tails twisted slowly, which looked particularly weird. She turned back to the room until Musian's back completely disappeared from her sight. Originally, she planned to go to Gongsun's house to visit Gongsun Xiong tonight, but now she thinks that Musian is right. She still needs to be more restrained during this period. Anyway, all her accomplices are dead, so there is no need for her to find ways to occupy Tianqian City. After all, if it is not the order of the seventh seat, who wants to be controlled by others? At the same time, how do you plan to deal with her? When Musian was walking on the way back, the shadow beside him suddenly twisted, and Wei Men grew in a yellow skirt quietly appeared, staring at his profile and asked. "Let her go for now, and let Elder Ren take care of her later," Musian said faintly. Bai Yuanfeng might have meant to test him just now, but Bai Yuanfeng didn't know that Musian was also testing her. If Bai Yuanfeng took action when he left, Wei Mengru would naturally come out to stop him. Bai Yuanfeng's true strength is probably more than the Qi training realm, but if they want to leave, Bai Yuanfeng can't stop them. Once they leave the Bai mansion, Lan Murian will immediately know the identity of the third demon cultivator. By then, the Bai family will be completely finished. There is a life and death struggle between demon cultivators and human cultivators. Hiding a demon cultivator is a serious crime and will be despised by everyone. "Are you going to tell Lan Murian about the demon cultivator?" Wei Mengru asked. Musian smiled and said, "The sect assessment is coming soon. Senior Sister Lan doesn't have that much time to think about this. Besides, as long as Madame Bai stays in the Bai family, no one will notice her evil spirit." "Well, but the energy of heaven can restrain the evil spirit. Go back and inform the servants to invite Ruoxi to the Mu family early tomorrow morning and tell them that I have something to talk to her about." Wei Mengru glanced at Musian coldly. She said that she was just chatting with Bai Ruoxi, but by then, it might not be just a simple chat. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 52. The next morning, Musian finished a night of meditation and opened his eyes. There was a slight knock on the door. "Did Bai Ruoxi come here early in the morning?" Musian said in a deep voice. "Come in." Pushing the door open, a girl with an elegant temperament walked into the room. Judging from her dress, she seemed to be a maid of the Mu family, but why did I feel that I had never seen this maid before? Musian looked at her a little puzzled. If there was such a beautiful maid in the Mu mansion, he would not have no impression of her. "When did you come to the Mu family?" Musian asked puzzledly. "I don't think I have seen you before, but I seem to have seen you somewhere." "This sounds like harassing others." Wei Mengru stood at the door of the room at some point and complained lightly. Then she said, "She is the daughter you saved in the Chen mansion before. Have you forgotten it yourself?" Musian was startled and looked at the maid a few more times. "She is pretty and has a good figure, Musian suddenly realized that this maid seemed to be the daughter of the Chen family who was almost humiliated by Gong Sun-zan a few days ago. I have been taken care of by Miss Wei during this period. I wanted to thank you earlier, but Miss Wei said that Mr. Mu was busy with other things, so I didn't bother you. The daughter of the Chen family bowed slightly and said in a soft voice. Thank you very much for your help before, Mr. Mu. Are you used to it here? Musian smiled. The daughter of the Chen family nodded and said softly, I was a little uncomfortable at first, but now I am slowly getting used to it. After all, she was a young lady in the past. She grew up with a silver spoon in her mouth. It is still difficult to get used to the life of a maid in a short time. This is life. You may still be a rich second generation in the previous second, but no one knows if something will suddenly happen in the next second. Just as the black-robed man said before he died, the court was already rotten. The emperor was incompetent and obsessed with beauty since he married a concubine. The officials under him were all very smart. On the surface, they had no intention of making money, but in fact, they had been corrupt and profiteering under the banner of justice over the years, making a lot of money and making a lot of money. The Gongsun family was not an official, but as a family of immortal cultivation, they had been in contact with officials in the court over the years, otherwise they would not have been raided every now and then. However, Musian did not know much about the affairs of the court, and he did not know why the Chen mansion was raided. Maybe it was because the censor of the Chen mansion was corrupt, or maybe he offended someone in the court. According to speculation, the latter is more likely. After all, the possibility of being raided just for corruption is basically zero. It should be that someone in the court and the public was offended, so he was secretly plotted. It was also because of this that Miss Chen almost caused a tragedy in her mansion before. If you have any difficulties, you can tell the person in charge of the mansion, Musian said. Originally, after the house was searched, these women should have been taken to the Jiao Fangxi, but for the Mu family, it was not difficult to stop someone in the middle of the way. Even if the people above knew, they would turn a blind eye. Miss Chen thanked again, and Musian just smiled back. Things in the court are unpredictable. The Chen mansion was investigated in 1 second, and it is possible that a colleague would rescue them in the next second, and they would rise to prominence from then on. Although generally speaking, there is basically no possibility of turning the tables after the house was searched. But, just think of it as doing something you want to do, and it can satisfy your heart a little, isn't it enough? Musian never thought of himself as a good person, but he didn't want to become a bad person. After watching the daughter of the Chen mansion leave, Musian turned his head to look at Wei Mengru and said, Sister Mengru, why did you come so early? Are you here to help me dress? Wei Mengru glanced at him. The eldest daughter of the Bai family is here to see you. She is in the backyard now. Oh, speaking of which, I asked someone to invite her to the Mu family yesterday morning. I didn't expect her to come so early. Musian yawned and stretched his body. You go first. I'll find you in the backyard after I change my clothes. After Wei Mengru left, Musian got up to change his clothes and tidied his hair in front of the bronze mirror. After all, if you want to meet a girl, you still have to ensure your image. After tidying up his hair and clothes, Musian left the room and came to the pavilion in the backyard. The morning sun was warm and the leaves rustled in the sun. By Ruoxi, who was dressed in a white long skirt and elegant and intellectual, sat under the pavilion, holding a book in her hand. Her black hair hung down in strands, and her slender neck was looming, white and crystal. Wei Mengru's figure was not seen. I don't know if she was hiding in the dark or hadn't come to the backyard yet. Musian held his breath and approached quietly. Bai Ruoxi seemed unaware, lowering her head to read, turning the pages with her slender fingers. Just when Musian was about to get behind her, a soft and cold voice sounded. Mr. Mu secretly blocked his chi and approached Ruoxi. Is there something he wants to do? Musian paused and looked at Bairuoxi in astonishment. Bairuoxi's perception ability is so strong even though they are both in the chi training stage. Bairuoxi looked sideways, with a faint smile on her face, and said, "If it was this time yesterday, I probably wouldn't be able to detect your breath, but when I woke up this morning, I found that I had practiced chi for 9 taste it. The effect of this heavenly energy is really good." Musian felt as sour as eating a lemon. Bairuoxi also had unconcealable joy in her eyes, but she nodded reservedly. Then he said, "The blessing effect of the chi of heaven is very strong, but the reason why I was promoted to the 9th level of chi training may be because you came to Beifu yesterday." "What does my coming to Beifu have to do with your promotion to the 9th level of chi training?" Musian asked confused. "He went to Bai Mansion yesterday just to investigate Bai Mu's affairs, and also made out with Bairuoxi by the way. Other than that, he didn't do much else." Bairuoxi's face turned red, and her calm voice was a little shy. "You are a natural furnace." Musian hesitated for half a second and finally understood what Bairuoxi meant. "So that's it, can just kissing trigger the effect of the natural furnace?" Musian was slightly stunned, and then looked at Bairuoxi's face and her perfectly curved buttocks sitting on the stone chair. It seems like I don't see the ears or tail. Is Bairuoxi really the child of that 3-tailed fox and a human?" Musian felt a little regretful. Bairuoxi obviously noticed Musian's gaze. Her cold face was stained with 2 light blushes, and she whispered, "Why are you staring at my head?" And she didn't have the nerve to say that word. She felt that Musian was a little strange today. He had been staring at her head and butt since he saw her. Could it be that after yesterday's intimacy, he had further ideas? "It's nothing, don't worry about it." Musian came back to his senses and smiled, "I just want to see if you have fox ears and a tail or something." "Fox ears and tail?" Bairuoxi was slightly startled, thinking of the demonization her mother showed her in the side hall yesterday. Her eyes slowly opened wide and she looked at Musian blankly. "You know everything. You know, isn't it normal? Didn't you just want to tell me about this yesterday?" Musian said with a smile. Bairuoxi was silent. "To be honest, I'm quite happy," Musian suddenly said. Bairuoxi was willing to tell him the truth, which meant that Bairuoxi believed that he would not leak the secret. This feeling of being trusted was wonderful. "What are you going to do?" Bairuoxi raised her head and stared at Musian. "Do you want to tell that senior sister about this?" Musian shook his head. "Senior sister is busy with the sex assessment now, so it's better not to cause any trouble to her." Bairuoxi breathed a sigh of relief quietly in her heart. In fact, she was still a little uneasy until she was on the way to Musian's house, because she had a vague hunch that Musian knew the truth. Hearing his answer now was like a reassurance, slowly relaxing the girl's tense nerves. Musian gently held Bairuoxi's slender, boneless hand, raised his head and stared at her pale face, and said, "Ruoxi, can I ask you something?" Her delicate hand was suddenly caught by someone, and she realized that Musian was staring at her closely. Bairuoxi lowered her eyes in embarrassment, with a shy luster in her beautiful peach blossom eyes, and whispered, "What's the matter?" Musian asked seriously, "Do you have fox ears and a tail?" Bairuoxi was slightly startled, looking at Musian with confusion in her eyes. "Is this kind of thing important?" "Important, very important." Musian was very serious. "Whether she is a fox-eared girl or not is a very important matter." Bairuoxi shook her head gently, "I don't know." She hesitated for a moment, glanced at Musian, and said softly, "But I remember that I occasionally felt itchy on my head before. I wonder if it has something to do with the fox ears you mentioned." "That's it?" Musian became somewhat interested. He sat next to Bairuoxi and leaned forward slightly, observing the girl's flawless face with curious eyes. The girl's clothes couldn't cover up her plump breasts, and a hint of snow white was faintly exposed in the sun. Musian couldn't help but take a second look, which made Bairuoxi lower her eyes in even more embarrassment. She didn't even notice that the book she just held in her hand fell to the ground. Compared with the cold attitude of "don't disturb strangers" when she first treated Musian, the girl who was in love obviously did not have such a psychological defense. She didn't even have any resistance when he was in such close contact with her, but she was a little shy in her heart. And overwhelmed. "I didn't see any fox ears," Musian muttered to himself, and the distance between the two of them had become very close unknowingly. Being so intimate with a member of the opposite sex in front of the pavilion, Bairuoxi, who had never been in love before, couldn't help but feel ashamed in her heart. Her face was shy, she turned her face away slightly, and pursed her lips tightly. A strand of thin hair fell from her forehead and gently rested on her lightly flushed face. Looking from the side, she had a three-dimensional look like a mixed-race beauty. Musian came closer again and kissed her snow-white jade neck gently, which made Bairuoxi's shoulders tremble subconsciously. She turned to look at Musian and said, "Have you finished observing? No matter how much you observe, you still you'll see fox ears." "Not yet, I'll take a look." Musian didn't give up. "Did I tell you?" As soon as Bairuoxi raised her head, she felt her lips being gently occupied by someone, and her heart suddenly felt hot. Her back was pressed against the stone pillar behind her, and slowly, her tense body gradually became tense. The ground softened. After fooling around for a while, Musian sat on the stone chair under Ting Pavilion and sighed with contentment. The ancients said that beautiful women are good for eating. I thought it was a lie, but now it seems. The ancients do not deceive me. Bairuoxi glanced at Musian secretly, her eyes full of resentment. She silently took out her handkerchief and wiped the remaining rouge on her lips. Obviously, when they first came into contact with him, Musian still looked like a gentleman. However, after the kiss yesterday, he seemed to have less and less scruples than before. "This is in the pavilion in the backyard. It would be embarrassing if a servant saw it." Musian noticed Bairuoxi's resentful look, pretended not to notice it, coughed slightly, and said, "Let's go to the competition arena. Starting from the next 2 days, there should be many young monks in the city competing there. Maybe we can see some old acquaintances there." Bairuoxi took a deep look at Musian and nodded silently. Thinking about it, now that the sex examination is about to begin, all the young talents in Tianqian City must be gearing up. There will be no shortage of competitions on weekdays. It's just a matter of going out to relax and calm down a little. Yangfeng Inn. This inn is located not far from the center of Tianqian City. There is a tea house not far from the inn. It is said to have a history of hundreds of years, and there is an endless stream of guests every day. Lan Mulian, who was wearing a moon-white dress, was sitting in a quiet and elegant tea room, rubbing the rim of the cup with her fingertips. She tilted her head slightly and looked casually at the competition platform in the distance. On the competition stage, a rather handsome young man was sparring with a young man from Tianqian City. Lan Mulian did not hear the conversation between them, but judging from the fierce attacks between the two, it seemed that there must be some deep hatred. The tall beauty sitting opposite was playing with the teacup in her hand, sitting with her white legs crossed, her red cheongsam accentuating her seductive figure, and her charming and affectionate eyes looking straight at Lan Mulian. The chief auctioneer of Chenexai Chamber of Commerce, Fei Ying. The location of this tea house should be the best in Tianqian City, and it is close to the competition stage. From here, my sister can see the competitions of young talents in Tianqian City, and the subsequent sect assessments. I have an idea in my mind, Fei Ying said softly. Lan Mulian nodded slightly. This is a relatively quiet tea room, and there is no need to worry about the opinions of outsiders, so Lan Mulian also took off the gauze on her face. Her face was extremely beautiful, but what was even more impressive were her eyes that were as cold as ice. Of these two sisters, one is an iceberg beauty, while the other is enchanting. If you take a closer look, you will find that Lan Mulian's appearance is very similar to Fei Ying's, but her temperament is different. The most attractive thing is not their appearance, but their identities as sisters. With the blessing of this identity, the meaning becomes completely different. That person is Ye Yu, a genius of the Ye family. Due to some reasons, his level plummeted and he became a waste. But this year, he returned to the peak of refining in less than half a year, Fei Ying said. It only took a few months to reach the peak of refining. Is it even just one step away from reaching the Qi realm? Lan Mulian whispered to himself, with a hint of thinking in his eyes. Such talent is indeed quite rare. But it's worth mentioning that a few days ago, it was said that Ye Yu had a sparring match with someone in the Dragon's Head Forest, and in the end Ye Yu was defeated miserably. Fei Ying gave up and wanted to hear her sister continue to ask. However, Lan Mulian didn't seem interested. He just looked calmly at Ye Yu, who had just defeated a fellow monk in front of the competition stage, with a thoughtful look in his eyes. Fei Ying held her cheeks up and unconsciously moved closer to the tea table, her heavy breasts gently pressing on the table. She looked out the window at the competition stage casually, and then her eyes suddenly fell on Musian, who had just arrived at the competition stage not far away. Why is he here too? Fei Ying suddenly muttered to herself. Lan Mulian followed his sister's gaze and stared at it for a moment. There were ripples in his cold eyes. He turned to look at his sister and said in a cold voice. You know him. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 53. Of course I know him. The young master of the Mu family is one of the most evil young men in Tianqian City. Who doesn't know him in Tianqian City? Fei Ying's charming eyes narrowed slightly, and her fingers painted with glamorous red nails were toying with a strand of hair as if nothing had happened. She turned her head to look at Musian in front of the competition stage, and continued, but my sister knows him, so let me. It's a bit unexpected. She returned her gaze to Lan Mulian, stared into her sister's eyes, and said, how did you know him? I met him on the way back to the inn that day, and he seemed to have gone to the room where you lived. Lan Mulian said calmly, the paper crane message between him and a friend of mine was accidentally sent to me, and I later chatted with him using the paper crane. Lan Feiying obviously didn't believe it. She said ha and said, does my sister really have friends? These words were a bit heartbreaking. If they were disciples of the Liangyi sect, no one would dare to talk to Lan Mulian like this, and they would only take it for granted that Lan Mulian had no friends around him. After all, the beauty of the iceberg is indeed difficult to approach. Even if someone sincerely wants to become a Taoist friend with Lan Mulian, it will be changed because of Lan Mulian's talent, making people doubt whether their motives are pure. In the final analysis, it is not that Lan Mulian wants to become an iceberg beauty, but that she already has such an image in people's minds. That's why the liveliness she showed in her letter was completely opposite to Lan Mulian's cold attitude at this time. Lan Mulian said coldly, Musian's talent is not bad, but his level is a bit low. Lan Feiying smiled and said, if my sister goes to Jiao Fangxi every now and then and indulges in debauchery every day, she will not be in the god-refining realm now. Do you like him? Lan Mulian asked. Fei Ying thought for a moment and smiled sweetly, I think I like him. In my eyes, he is like a younger brother. However, he is a younger brother who likes to pretend to be an adult and tease others. Fei Ying didn't want to stay on this topic for too long, so she changed the subject and said, speaking of which, has my sister considered the candidates to participate in the sex assessment? There are two types of sect assessments in the Liangyi section. One is led by the assessor and personally escorts the disciples who participate in the sect assessment to the assessment location. The other is those who go to Mount Bai to participate in the sect assessment by themselves. The two look the same, but there are huge differences. The disciples chosen by Lan Mulian will have the opportunity to skip the stage of outer disciples and directly become inner disciples. Each assessor has such a quota. Have you brought the list of Tianqian City's geniuses you mentioned before? Lan Mulian asked. Fei Ying nodded slightly and handed a list to Lan Mulian and said, the demon Huang Manting from the Chenexai Chamber of Commerce, Yayu from the Ye family, Mu Jian from the Mu family, Gongsun Cheng, the fourth son of the Gongsun family, and the Bai family's Miss Bai Ruoxi, and about a dozen other names, all roughly marked with their past experiences. You can refer to them. Actually, to put it bluntly, they are the children of the big families in Tianqian City. After all, they were born with good conditions, and their parents are both Qi and God refiners. The children they give birth to are naturally talented. Lan Mulian took a general look and saw that in addition to the people Fei Ying mentioned, there were about a dozen names. Her eyes lingered on Muzian's name for a moment. She shook her head slightly and said, his talent is pretty good, but it's a pity that he had a bad attitude in the past. If he practiced normally, Muzian should be at least at the 7th level of Qi refining now. My attitude was not correct in the past, but recently I did something earth-shattering. Fei Ying tried to woo her sister. Lan Mulian's eyes moved slightly, but they remained calm. He just looked at his sister and said nothing. Seeing that her sister was not fooled, Fei Ying curled her lips and continued, he killed the third son of the Gongsun family in a rage because of a woman he didn't know. This incident caused a huge uproar in Tianqian City before. At first everyone thought that the Gongsun family would not give up. In the end, I don't know what the two families secretly negotiated, and the matter was settled. Soon after that, it was reported that the third son of the Gongsun family was killed by a mysterious black-robed man. Lan Mulian's eyes remained calm. From this point of view, Muzian should have transferred all the conflicts between himself and the Gongsun family to the man in black robe. You said so much, just want to tell me that his character is not bad and not as bad as I thought. Lan Mulian saw Fei Ying's purpose at a glance. Fei Ying smiled sweetly, I just told a fact. Actually, it doesn't matter whether you say it or not. Lan Mulian picked up the teacup, took a sip, and said quietly, he doesn't need my help in the first place. The Mu family already had a quota for recommendation, so there was no need to fight with these people from the beginning. However, who should be given the spot as an inner disciple, we have to think about it again. At this time, Fei Ying suddenly said, there seems to be a little commotion down there. Lan Mulian turned his head and looked slightly, and then realized that Yayu, who had just defeated a fellow monk in front of the competition, had obviously noticed Muzian and immediately pointed the tip of his sword in Muzian's direction. Muzian, do you dare to come up and compete with me? In front of the competition stage, the young man was dressed in black robes, with an indifferent expression, and his dark eyes stared at the young man who looked like a handsome young man in the audience. At the same time, several eyes in the audience looked over, and their eyes fell on Muzian. Muzian sighed and said, Master Ye, I'm just here to watch everyone compete and learn from each other. I'm not in the mood to do anything today. Yeah, you had only lost to him for so long, so why did he have the courage to challenge him again? And he didn't mention anything about the Qi of Heaven. Did he not want others to know about it, or did he give up? Muzian was looking at Yayu, when Ruoxi suddenly sent a message, Yayu is only a little bit close to reaching the Qi training state. Muzian narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at Yayu a few more times. Taking a closer look, Yayu's temperament seems to be different from before. Yayu gave people a somewhat inflated feeling before, but now he looks much calmer. However, when his eyes fell on Muzian, there was still unconcealable hostility in his eyes. This cultivation speed is simply ridiculously fast. Sure enough, the chosen one is the chosen one, and his luck is better than others. Even if he loses the Qi of Heaven, are there still other gold fingers? Mr. Mu, Master Ye has invited the fight so kindly. Do you want to avoid the fight, in front of a stone chair not far from the competition stage, Gongsun Cheng, the fourth son of the Gongsun family, leaned on the stone chair with his legs crossed. Trying to hold fire. Musian smiled, Master Gongsun, do you think sparring is more important, or beauty is more important? Gongsun Cheng raised his eyebrows slightly and said with a smile, beauty is important, but I heard that the Ye family made a marriage arrangement with the daughter of the Bai family a long time ago. Master Mu is so ruthless in grabbing love, it's no wonder that Master Ye is so angry. I think it's better to go on stage and fight with him so that he can vent his anger. Musian smiled and said, does this have anything to do with you? I'm just giving you some advice. Gongsun Cheng shrugged, looking calm. Who are you sending it to? Musian said with a smile. Gongsun Cheng seemed to have been broken, and the calmness on his face suddenly disappeared. He narrowed his eyes slightly, stared at Musian, and said, Master Mu, I don't have as good a temper as you. Even in the arena, I can't guarantee that I won't do anything. This was already a thinly veiled threat. But it's no wonder that Gongsun Cheng is a monk at the 8th level of Qi training. Musian's strength is indeed inferior to Gongsun Cheng, at least from a superficial point of view. In fact, Gongsun Cheng wanted to find an opportunity to teach Musian a lesson, because according to the patriarch, his father would be seriously injured in bed. The head of the Bai family was the biggest reason, but it seemed that Musian was also involved. Although he didn't know the reason, he took this opportunity to teach Musian a lesson. Looking at Gongsun Cheng, who stood up slowly, Bai Ruoxi stepped forward and stood in front of Musian. Is Miss Bai intending to protect your little lover? She went to find the eldest young master of the Mu family just after the engagement was terminated. However, judging from the current performance of young Master Ye, your vision may not be very good, Gongsun Cheng Led said in a somewhat sarcastic tone. Shut up, Bai Ruoxi responded coldly, and the bronze sword quietly appeared behind her. Are you planning to take action? Gongsun Cheng's eyes fell on the young man behind Bai Ruoxi, and he smiled and said, Master Mu, are you planning to hide behind this woman? Musian smiled and said, that's the plan. I have a beautiful Taoist companion to protect me, how about you? Gongsun Cheng narrowed his eyes slightly and said, it seems that young Master Mu is still proud of it. Which male of his generation doesn't want a powerful and beautiful Taoist companion? Musian looked around at the crowd and said loudly, is there anyone who doesn't want a powerful and beautiful Taoist monk? Is there such a person? All the male monks in the competition stage couldn't help but laugh out loud. The answers were all self-explanatory. Who wouldn't want a Taoist priest with strong strength, perky breasts, and a slim waist? What's more, this Taoist monk is still Bai Ruoxi. Among peers, those who pursue Bai Ruoxi can be lined up from inside the city to outside the city. The laughter of the crowd was particularly harsh in Gongsun Cheng's ears. He stared into Musian's eyes and said word by word, Musian. You're anxious. Musian sighed. Compared with his father, Gongsun Cheng is still a little behind. Gongsun Cheng's eyes suddenly became sharp, and he drew his sword and struck at Musian. Bai Ruoxi raised her hand to seal the secret, and the bronze sword behind her flew out towards Gongsun Cheng. Gongsun Cheng snorted coldly, and several layers of faint halos appeared on his body. This is the method of the Gongsun family's martial arts. The strength of the Golden Bell Buddha cannot be broken without refining the gods. He raised his hand and moved towards Musian's hand, with a cold look in his eyes. At this time, a shattering sound like a glass breaking on the ground was suddenly heard. When the bronze sword reached the aperture of Jin Zhong Fo Jin, it was blasted to pieces almost instantly, as simple as puncturing a piece of paper. Boom! The sword wind of the bronze sword blasted out, and a mouthful of blood spurted out from Gongsun Cheng's mouth. He flew backwards and fell heavily to the ground. There was deathly silence in front of the competition stage, and the younger generation's eyes were all staring blankly at the eldest lady of the Bai family standing gracefully on the stage. defeated Gongsun Cheng, who was at the 8th level of Qi training, with just one sword strike. The strength of this eldest lady of the Bai family is probably invincible at the same level. While everyone in the venue had surprised expressions on their faces, Musian's expression remained calm. Of course, this is all pretend. At this moment, Musian was also a little surprised in his heart, so much so that he couldn't help but look at Bairuoxi one more time. He knew that Bairuoxi's strength was very strong now, but he didn't expect it to be so strong. A cultivator of the 9th level of Qi training defeated a cultivator of the 8th level of Qi training with just one sword. He now believed more and more that Bairuoxi was the protagonist. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 54. Just one sword defeated Gongsun Cheng head-on. Even though Musian had known that Bairuoxi was now extraordinary, he was still a little surprised. He knew that the bronze sword brought a great bonus to Bairuoxi, but he didn't expect it to be so great. "Master, are you okay?" Not far away, two servants hurried forward to Gongsun Cheng's side. Gongsun Cheng covered his chest and supported himself with difficulty with the help of two servants, but he almost stumbled and fell. He felt the spiritual energy in his body was as chaotic as a raging sea, and he also noticed that several eyes were falling on him. He felt extremely ashamed in his heart and stared at the woman standing with a sword on her back. "Miss Bai, the Bai family has just recovered a little in the past 2 days. Do you want to provoke a dispute between the Bai family and the Gongsun family again?" Bairuoxi frowned slightly, stared at Gongsun Cheng, and said nothing. Seeing this, Gongsun Cheng said coldly, "This is originally a matter between Master Mu and me. If you withdraw now, I can pretend that this matter has never happened." With the return of Bai's father in the past 2 days, the Bai family seems to have signs of counterattack. Gongsun Cheng's words are actually just looking for a place to find a way out, and secondly, to suppress the arrogance of the Bai family. Seeing Bairuoxi fall silent, Gongsun Cheng showed a sneer on his face and was about to continue speaking. At this time, Musian suddenly smiled and said, "After being crushed by others, you started to use the family to suppress others. Can you represent the entire Gongsun family?" The Mu family has only recently delegated power to Musian, and there are several elders in the refining god realm in the family who are in seclusion. Once something happens, those elders can come out to clean up the mess. But there are a total of 6 children of the Gongsun clan leader, and Gongsun Cheng ranks 4th. The competition in the clan is fierce. If Gongsun Cheng can represent the entire Gongsun family, it is naturally impossible. In the final analysis, he was just a bully who was trying to scare people. If you are causing trouble outside, will Uncle Gongsun really break your legs if he knows about it? Musian asked slowly. Gongsun Xiong probably wants to keep a low profile and recover from his injuries. If he knew that Gongsun Cheng had offended the eldest young master of the Mu family, he would be scolded when he returned. Gongsun Cheng obviously understood this, and just stared at Musian and said, "Young Master Mu, do you dare to compete with me?" "I dare not." Musian spread his hands. "In fact, there is no point in competing. Your 8th grade Qi training is too watery. Being defeated by a sword of your peers really makes me lose interest," Musian added. At this point, he seemed to remember something important. He tapped his palms and said with a concerned tone, "By the way, I still have some healing medicine in my house. I'll have someone send it to you in 2 days." Gongsun Cheng felt a sweetness in his throat and the blood in his body was boiling. "Master, calm down. He is provoking you. If you get angry now, you will hurt yourself," the attendant on the side whispered. Gongsun Cheng suppressed his inner anger and said coldly, "I recognize Miss Bai's strength. I am afraid that no one among her peers can beat her. But what does this have to do with you? A useless young master of the 3rd level of Qi training is worthy of pointing fingers at me." Musian was not annoyed, but showed a gentle and elegant smile, saying, I really can't beat Ruoxi, but you, an 8th level of chi training, were also severely injured by a sword. What's the difference between you and me, a 3rd level of chi training? Anyway, we are both beaten into a dog without a home, I can beat him. Gongsun Cheng's chest was ignited with anger in an instant, and he burst out with an unconcealable murderous aura, staring at Musian's eyes. What's more, Musian seemed not to notice Gongsun Cheng's eyes, slightly turned his head to look at the beautiful woman next to him, who was now full of temperament, and gently held by Ruoxi's soft little hand under the wide eyes of everyone. Ruoxi and I don't have any deep hatred, right? Musian turned his head and looked at her with a smile. Countless eyes subconsciously fell on Ruoxi. She just lowered her eyes slightly, with a light blush on her face, but she didn't push Musian's hand away or hit him with a sword as people hoped. She just let Musian hold her hand in countless sour eyes, buried her face, and said softly. At that moment, everyone in front of the arena couldn't sit still. They felt itchy and wanted to kick Musian away and replace him. Although it was already clear that the relationship between the two didn't seem to be that simple, when they saw Musian holding Ruoxi's hand so openly, it was still a little hard to accept, and even had the same idea as Gongsun Cheng, teach this young master of the Mu family a lesson. However, when they saw the girl beside him and remembered her identity, they calmed down, but they were all full of emotion. They are both in the chi training realm, but they broke Gongsun Cheng's golden bell Buddha power with just one sword. Miss Bai is probably invincible among her peers. Her skills are a bit strange, and she should not be able to use them repeatedly, but if she can use that bronze sword several times in a battle, who can stop her? Alas, although the Bai family is now in decline, relying on Ruoxi alone, they will probably have a high achievement in the future. I wonder who will be able to pursue such a woman in the future. Someone couldn't help but sigh softly. Just look at who is holding her hand now, and you will know. These words made all the male cultivators present a little bit nervous, so that the scene was silent for a long time. Why do I suddenly feel that Musian deserves a beating? Suddenly someone whispered out people's thoughts. It's not that he deserves a beating, but that he deserves a beating when he stays with Miss Bai. I really want to smash his handsome face with a punch. You go and try. What are you trying for? Why don't you go? The man immediately snorted coldly. The strength that Ruoxi showed today was enough to make fellow cultivators fearful. Although they knew that the bronze sword behind her should not be reused, no one knew how many times she could use the bronze sword in a battle. Besides, if he attacked the eldest young master of the Mu family in Tianqian City, he would not want his life. Gongsun Cheng was simply too impulsive, and he dared to be so reckless because he relied on the fact that the Mu family did not dare to launch a large-scale attack on the Gongsun family. But he did not expect that this recklessness would cost him such a great price. The first genius of the Gongsun family was defeated by Ruoxi's sword. If this matter spread out, Gongsun Cheng would not be able to raise his face in Tianqian City in the future. Even if he can join Lianji sect in the future, it will be a shame for his whole life. The two servants of the Gongsun family also knew that they could not get any benefit here today, so they supported Gongsun Cheng and planned to leave. By the way, Master Gongsun. Looking at the genius boy of the Gongsun family who was about to leave, Musian seemed to remember something important, and suddenly said, I think I should go home more often than I worry about other people's affairs. Gongsun Cheng stopped, turned his head and stared at Musian, and said, What do you mean? It means, it doesn't matter how strong you and I are, what's important is the base. Musian smiled. Your home is almost gone, and you are still thinking about sparring with me 1v1, what are you thinking? Looking at Musian's smile, for some reason, Gongsun Cheng suddenly had a bad premonition in his heart. When Gongsun Cheng left with difficulty under the help of his servants, Musian retracted his gaze, turned his head to the crowd, bowed his hands, and said, What happened today made you laugh? Ruoxi and I came here today just to see the competition of the younger generation. so we won't take up your time from now on. Everyone also bowed their hands, which was considered to be a deal. The eldest young master of the Mu family gave him face, so they naturally wouldn't give him any face. After all, not everyone is like Gongsun Cheng and Yayu who don't get along with Musian. Although it is a bit jealous to see Bairuoxi next to him. The competition among the crowd continued, and the audience talked about what happened just now with relish. Yayu, who was originally admired by everyone for his amazing talent, seemed to be dim and forgotten all of a sudden. People no longer paid attention to Yayu defeating the Qi training cultivator with the strength of the peak of the refining essence, but began to discuss the matter of Bairuoxi and Musian. After all, compared to a genius beauty like Bairuoxi, Yayu's talent seems to be a little dim. In addition, a cultivator of the 9th level of Qi training and a playboy of the 3rd level of Qi training are together, and the other party is Bairuoxi. This alone is enough to make people talk about it. Musian took Bairuoxi's hand and walked to a nearby stone chair and sat down. The cold beauty in the past seemed shy and lovely at this time, and this shyness was only shown to Musian. The sun quietly fell on the ground, and carriages passed by on the streets in the distance, and ancient buildings were located here. Musian leaned against a stone chair to bask in the sun, holding Bairuoxi's slender white hand with one hand, looking at her sideways, and said with a smile, "Ruoxi, did you hide your tail secretly? Let it out for me to see." Bairuoxi, who was outside, was obviously much more reserved. She just shook her head gently and said, "I really don't have any tail or ears. Mr. Mu, don't make fun of me. I don't believe it unless you let me see it." Bairuoxi rolled his eyes at Musian. How else can he see it? The ears can be seen directly, but the tail. By the way, before the sect assessment begins, let's live in the Mu mansion first, Musian suddenly said. Joking should be moderate. If it really makes Bairuoxi unhappy, it will be more trouble than gain. Bairuoxi hesitated and said, "Why do you want to live in the Mu mansion?" Musian leaned close to the girl's ear and whispered, "The energy of the heavenly Dao will purify the nearby spiritual energy, and at the same time it will also expose the demonic energy on your mother." Bairuoxi's eyes slowly widened a little, and subconsciously turned his head to look at Musian. "Really? How do you think I discovered your mother's secret at that time?" Musian said. "No wonder he knew about my mother at that time. It turned out to be because of the energy of heaven." Bairuoxi was silent, so she nodded slightly. "Then I'll trouble you during this period of time." As soon as she said this, she felt that the boy was playing with her little hand, and her heart became even more ashamed. She raised her eyes and glanced around guiltily, confirming that no one noticed them, and then she was relieved. Musian was so bold before he lived in the Mu mansion. If he really lived in the Mu mansion during this period of time, would he really not mess around? Bairuoxi had a little worry in her heart. Musian didn't know that Bairuoxi was worried about his safety. At this time, he was holding the little hand of this beauty and playing with it, while looking up at the competition in front of the arena, very leisurely. "Yayu, win." A clear voice came from the arena in the distance, which also attracted Musian's attention. He raised his head slightly and looked. Yayu, wearing a black robe, had just defeated another cultivator in the Qi training realm. Musian also recognized that person. If he remembered correctly, he should be a cultivator of the 2nd level of Qi training. This Yayu's strength seems to be a little stronger than before. Musian was thoughtful. Just at this time, Yayu also noticed Musian's gaze, slightly turned his head to look over, raised the corner of his mouth, raised his thumb in the direction of Musian, and then slowly lowered it. Musian, who did not dare to accept the challenge of a cultivator at the peak of the refining realm, was just this level. Even without thinking, one could guess the meaning of Yayu's action. And for this low-level provocation, Musian naturally just laughed it off. Under Yayu's gaze, Musian slightly turned his head, gently pushed aside Byruoxi's hair on his forehead, and kissed the beautiful girl's pure and flawless face. Then he raised his thumb to Yayu. Pattern, just like this. What are you doing? Byruoxi glared at Musian, sounding a little unhappy. It's okay, you're so cute that I can't help it. Musian held the girl's hand and soothed her softly. Yayu on the stage froze slightly in place, staring at the scene blankly, without saying a word for a long time. Until now, he couldn't figure out where he was worse than Musian. Even a discerning person could see that his talent was far superior to Musian, and his future achievements would even be higher than Musian. But Byruoxi still chose Musian instead of him. Yayu's fists clenched quietly, and a jealous fire in his heart burned uncontrollably. Brother Yayu, the elders of the clan asked you to return to the mansion, as if they had something to tell you. At this time, a clear, sweet and pleasant voice suddenly came from the audience. Musian looked over and saw a cute girl wearing a light blue double-breasted dress, a thin belt around her waist, long black hair hanging down in front of her slender waist, and a pair of deerskin boots on her feet. In modern times, she would probably give people the impression of a pure and sweet girl. If I remember correctly, it should be the daughter of the eldest elder of the Ye family, Yechian. Yayu was obviously not in a good mood. After jumping down from the arena, he glanced at his cute cousin and said in a deep voice, "Do you know what it is?" Yechian shook her head, "I don't know, the elders didn't say." Yayu said softly and turned away. Yechian hesitated for a moment, looked at her cousin who was leaving, and suddenly said, "By the way, brother Yayu, I remember you are an alchemist, right? I have reached the peak of refining essence. Can you help me refine a chi training pill later? I will pay you for the work and the materials." Yayu did not answer, but said lightly, "Let's talk about it when we get back." In the past, when he became a waste, Yechian's relationship with him had always been quite ordinary, until recently, the two of them had some exchanges, and coupled with the fact that he had just been broken by Musian's action, Yayu was naturally in no mood to chat with his cousin at this time. Yechian looked up at Yayu's departing back, and couldn't help but lowered his head, with a hint of loss in his eyes. If his cousin refused to help, he would have to ask the alchemist of Chenexai auction house to do it for him later. Although the price would be a little more expensive, if he wanted to ensure that he could break through the chi training realm, chi training pills were still very necessary. Yechian sighed in his heart, walked towards the direction where Yayu left, and prepared to return to the Ye family. At this moment, she suddenly saw a tall figure appear in front of her. With soft hair and wearing luxurious robes, he looked as gentle as a gentleman, with a smile on his face. For a young girl like Yechian who was just beginning to fall in love, Musian simply met all the fantasies of a young girl in love, so much so that her eyes could not help but stay on his face for a long time. Then she came back to her senses, shook her head quickly, and said with a pair of deer-like clear eyes with a vigilant look, "Mr. Mew, what's the matter?" She knew that her cousin and Musian did not get along well, and she was also aware of Musian's past behavior in Tianqian City. In the past, the elders of the clan reminded her more than once that she must not have any intimate exchanges with Musian. Yechian always kept this in mind, so this was also her first face-to-face contact with Musian. Musian smiled, "Don't be nervous, Yayu and I are just personal grudges, don't be so vigilant against me." Under Yechian's vigilant eyes, Musian took out a delicate little box from the ring and handed it to her. "What is this?" Yechian frowned slightly, glanced at Musian, and opened the small box. In the box was a round pill, it was the chi training pill. "Mr. Mew, I can't take this." Yechian immediately returned the small box to Musian and firmly refused. Musian kept a gentle smile, "If you don't want it now, you will still have to go to the auction house to buy the materials and find someone to refine it in 2 days, which will take a lot of time and money. I'm not giving this chi training pill to you, but selling it to you at the original price. As for the spirit stone, you can have someone send it to the Mu mansion next time. It seems that he is not as fierce as the rumors say, but a good person? Yechian looked at Musian's gentle smile and the sincere look in his eyes. After hesitating for a moment, she finally took the chi training pill silently with both hands. I didn't bring any spiritual stones with me today. I'll bring the money to you tomorrow. After saying that, Yechian bowed slightly to Musian, holding the small box in both hands, and trotted away. Her deerskin boots stepped on the ground, and her skirt fluttered gently with the breeze, and a little white skin on her thighs could be vaguely seen. Musian looked at this scene, and a happy smile appeared on his face. Well, helping others really makes people feel better. He retracted his gaze and sat down next to Bairuoxi, watching the young generation on the stage leisurely, and occasionally teasing the girl next to him, which was very pleasant. In the tea house. Sister, how do you feel about the performance of the young master of the Mu family this time? Fei Ying asked with a smile. Lan Mulian inadvertently retracted her gaze, and said in a light tone, very good. Good talent, very smart. As for character, it needs to be discussed, it is a good seedling. After watching the competition this time, it was Ye Yu and Gong Sun Cheng's performance that was a bit disappointing. Although she has good talent, her character is really bad. A true cultivator should not be so easily influenced by others. Where is Bairuoxi? Fei Ying asked. Lan Mulian was silent for a long time and said, if the master sees her, he might have the idea of accepting her as a disciple. Based on Bairuoxi's performance just now, it is not an exaggeration to say that she is invincible among her peers. The power of that bronze sword, among the cultivators in the chi training realm, I am afraid no one can take it head on. Fei Ying glanced at the Don Chamber of Commerce who had just come on stage on the competition stage, and smiled, it seems that we have almost finished drinking this tea, why don't we go downstairs to take a look? Sister should also want to know the eldest lady of the Bai family in person, right? For some reason, when she said this, Fei Ying looked at her sister with a meaningful look. Lan Mulian was unaware and took a sip of tea. Then, she glanced at the beautiful girl in a white dress under the tea house, nodded slightly, and said softly. Okay. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 55. Ye Yu is still lucky after all. His fiancée broke off the engagement, and a cousin came right after. Will there be another cousin or childhood sweetheart next time? Musian leaned on the stone chair, slightly raised his head and looked at the two monks fighting on the stage. Thinking back to what happened just now, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Thinking about it carefully, Ye Yu's luck is really quite good, and there are many beautiful girls around him. It's just a pity that Ye Yu is too obsessed with his fiancée now, and he doesn't seem to realize the good of his cousin. The girl named Yechian is still very cute. What did you say to Yechian just now? Bairuoxi turned her head slightly to look at Musian, and asked softly. She saw the actions of the two people not far away just now. Although she didn't know what Musian said at that time, from Yechian's shy expression at that time, it was obvious that he said something nice. Musian came back to his senses, shook his head and smiled, nothing, just helping others. So I gave her a chi training pill, Bairuoxi asked. Did she even see this? Musian explained, it's not a gift, I just sold it to her at the original price. Bairuoxi was not happy, frowned slightly, and said, selling it to her at the original price is no different from giving it to her. In this world, alchemists are an extremely rare profession. Usually, the medicinal materials are handed over to the alchemists and asked them to refine them. The OEM fee alone is enough to buy another batch of the same medicinal materials. Even in the huge Tianqian city, there are only a few people who have the identity of alchemists. In fact, what Bairuoxi said is not wrong. Selling the pill to Yechian at the original price is basically no different from giving it to her. You and Ye Yu have such a bad relationship? What's the point of doing this? Bairuoxi looked at Musian's profile and whispered, or, do you like that girl? When she said this, she lowered her eyes slightly, her long and curled eyelashes caught the light, and her eyes looked a little dark. Why does it feel like she will sacrifice the bronze sword at any time? Musian said. Ruoxi, you probably haven't heard a word. Bairuoxi's beautiful eyes regained some luster, and she raised her head slightly to look at him. Under the girl's gaze, Musian continued, free things are the most expensive. Bairuoxi frowned slightly, still puzzled. But Musian did not explain, just gently pinched the beauty's soft and boneless little hand, and smiled, won't you stay in the Mu mansion in the future? You will know soon. If it is worthless, it will be given away for free. But this Chi training pill is not a worthless thing. Some things that seem to be free have actually been secretly marked with their prices. Seeing that Bairuoxi still had some doubts, Musian leaned close to the girl's ear and whispered, you just need to know that it's enough for me to have you by my side now. Bairuoxi's face was slightly red, and she felt the warm palm gently holding her slender hand, lowered her eyes, and said softly. Although she seems to be cold and aloof at ordinary times, she is actually a very shy beauty. Musian looked at Bairuoxi's beautiful profile and couldn't help but smile knowingly. At this time, countless eyes suddenly looked over at once, staring at Musian in surprise. Even though they all knew the relationship between me and Bairuoxi, they were still so surprised. It seems that the charm of the most beautiful woman in Tianqian City still makes these people hard to let go. Musian didn't care about the eyes of these people. He smiled at everyone, then retracted his gaze and raised his head to continue watching the battle in front of the high platform. However, at this moment, Musian suddenly felt a chill on his back for no reason. Then, an indescribable coldness surged in my heart. They didn't seem to be looking at me and Ruoxi. Musian turned his head and looked in the direction of the crowd. Only then did he realize that Lan Mulian, wearing a veil and with a cold expression, had sat behind him at some point. She raised her head slightly, and her cold eyes calmly looked at the two young juniors sparring in front of the high platform. Lan Feiying, with a charming and sexy figure, sat in the corner with her plump legs crossed. She seemed to be looking at the high platform, but in fact her eyes were on Musian from beginning to end. She didn't want the people in Tianqian City to know about her relationship with her sister. First, she didn't want too many people with ulterior motives to approach her, and second, she didn't want others to compare her with her sister. Of course, she just tried to avoid being known, but she didn't hide it too deliberately, otherwise she wouldn't have come out with Lan Mulian today. Why is she here? Musian asked in surprise, sister, why are you here too? The sect assessment is coming soon. I want to confirm the number of disciples participating in the sect assessment in advance, so I came to take a look early in the morning, Lan Murian said lightly. As the examiner of the sect assessment, it is indeed a matter of course to confirm the disciples participating in the assessment in advance. In the 10 seconds after Lan Murian answered, Musian first nodded slightly to show his understanding, and then, as if he realized something, the smile on his face paused slightly. He looked at Lan Murian's beautiful and refined face with a slightly dull look, hesitated for a moment, and spoke with difficulty. When did you come? Lan Murian pondered for a moment, with a smile in his eyes, earlier than you. So this woman saw all my previous actions. No, where was she looking at the arena? Musian still didn't give up and said, why didn't I see my senior sister in front of me? If he had just known that Lan Mulian was nearby, how could he be intimate with Bairuoxi in front of her? At least he would wait until he got back to do those little actions. There is a tea house nearby, and the view from one of the tea houses is good, Lan Mulian said lightly. Musian also knew that the tea house was near Yangfeng Inn. He had been to that tea house in the past and sat in the tea house with a great view to watch the competition on the arena, which was very pleasant. but he didn't expect that Lan Mulian even knew one of the features of Tianqian City. At this moment, the smile on Musian's face was a little bit unbearable. However, Lan Murian didn't seem to care about what he had just done. She looked up at the beauty in a black dress on the stage and said, "She is the enchanting girl of the Dawn Chamber of Commerce, Huang Manting." Musian barely stabilized his thoughts and looked up. At this moment, on the stage, a girl in a black dress who looked enchanting was fighting with a cultivator of the same generation. The black dress made her skin look particularly white. Musian nodded slightly. "It's Huang Manting." He and Huang Manting had met once, but the two were not familiar with each other. Lan Murian looked at her again and nodded slightly. "Good talent." Then, she suddenly changed her tone and said, "But in terms of talent, it seems that the white girl next to you is better." Based on Bairuoxi's performance just now, it's no wonder that Lan Murian said so. If it was normal, Musian would think that Lan Murian was sincerely praising Bairuoxi, but for some reason, when he heard this at this time, he always felt that Lan Murian had something else to say. Bairuoxi slightly tilted her head to look at the examiner, smiling, and said reservedly, "I am very happy that you can say this, but it is all thanks to Master Mu that Ruoxi can have what he has today." Lan Murian seemed to be interested, looked at Musian for a few times, and said, "It seems that although Master Mu's realm is not high, he is very helpful. He went to Lianji sect that night to find a medicinal material to save people, right?" Musian smiled reservedly and said nothing. For the first time in his life, he felt great psychological pressure. At this time, Bairuoxi gently took Musian's arm, raised his face, looked at Lan Murian, and smiled lightly. "If you are interested, I will chat with you next time you come to Mu's house. I will stay in his house during this period." The cold senior sister Lan raised her eyebrows slightly, looked at Bairuoxi with a smile and said, "Okay." Musian bathed in the warm sunshine, but felt his scalp tingling and his back slightly cold. He could fight with demon cultivators and even the Gongsun family, and even roughly guess what they were thinking, but he couldn't guess what these two were thinking now, and what their words meant. Women's minds are much harder to guess than Gongsun Xiong and demon cultivators. "Senior sister, it's getting late. I have something else to do, so I'll go back first. I'll contact you later." Musian decided to get up and say goodbye. If staying here and being intimate with Bairuoxi just now was quite enjoyable, then now there is no enjoyment at all. For Musian, this is simply a torture. Lan Murian didn't raise her eyelids, as if she didn't hear it, and just said lightly. Musian smiled politely, no longer hesitated, and got up and left the arena. There was a carriage parked outside that had been waiting for a long time. Musian lifted the curtain and walked into the carriage. Bairuoxi bent slightly and followed into the carriage. Neither of them spoke. It was not until the carriage began to move slowly that Bairuoxi said quietly, "That senior sister seems to care about you." The tone seemed to carry some emotions different from usual. Musian reached out to grab Bairuoxi's hand, but the girl immediately retracted her hand and didn't let him touch it. In the carriage, Musian didn't have so many scruples. Seeing that Bairuoxi didn't let him touch her hand, he simply reached out and past her waist, gently placed it on her fragrant shoulder, and then gently embraced her to his side. Bairuoxi's shoulder then pressed against Musian's shoulder. In the dim light, a beautiful face was full of displeasure. "What is your relationship with the senior sister?" Bairuoxi raised her eyes when she said this, and her peach blossom eyes looked a little dark. This sounded more like, "Are you and that woman having an underground relationship?" Musian said helplessly, "I seem to have told you before that the medicine for refining the treatment of your father's injury lacked the medicinal material of the Beast King vine, and that medicinal material was finally given by senior sister. Even the Beast King vine was directly given. It turns out that their relationship is really good." Bairuoxi closed her eyes, and returned to her usual weak and lovely appearance, and said softly, "Senior sister is so good to you, I wish I could help you in the future. Musian gently hugged Bairuoxi's waist, leaned close to her ear and whispered softly, "You can be with me now, which is a great help." Feeling the warm breath of the young man wrapped around herself, listening to the gentle voice in her ear, the cold beauty outside just now seemed to no longer exist, her heart softened, and she nestled in Musian's warm chest. The originally unhappy mood just now was gradually relieved with this warmth. Musian felt Bairuoxi's soft body through a layer of clothes, and the intoxicating fragrance on her body, but he was a little absent-minded. He turned his head to look at the street scene outside the carriage that was gradually moving backwards, and sighed helplessly in his heart. Both Lan Murian and Bairuoxi were very smart beauties. He began to worry whether his dual-threaded operation would eventually kill himself. Ye Mansion. After Yechian returned to the Ye family with the exquisite little box, he trotted all the way to his room, but in his mind he recalled the charming and gentle smile of the boy just now. The elders in the clan always said that the eldest young master of the Mu family was a playboy who did many evil things, but today he didn't look like a bad guy. It's better to say that he is a very gentle brother. The cold attitude of Yayu towards his cousin when he just walked down the arena and Musian's gentle smile, the two were suddenly a little obvious. I'll take the spirit stone back to him tomorrow morning. When Yechian thought of this, she stepped on the floor with her deerskin boots and walked towards the room. At this moment, Yayu, who had just gone to the hall to meet the elders, came towards her. Cousin Yechian called out crisply. Yayu's face was much calmer than before, as if he had calmed down on the way back. He said, "Chiener, please send the medicinal materials for the Chi training pill to the door of my room later." He wanted to apologize for his cold attitude in front of the arena just now, but he held back for the sake of face. Anyway, refining a Chi training pill for his cousin is also an indirect apology. However, Yechian's little face was slightly hesitant, and she politely refused, "It's no longer needed." "Thank you for your kindness, cousin." After that, she passed by Yayu holding the small box and left slowly. Her back is extremely beautiful, with long hair scattered around her waist, like a flower about to bloom. Her small front opening dress sets off her curves, and the whiteness of her calves can be vaguely seen under her skirt, which looks translucent in the sun. Yayu frowned slightly, but did not say anything else. Yechian is at the age of a young girl, and she probably doesn't know how many spirit stones it will cost to find an alchemist to refine a Chi training pill. When she goes to the auction house to find out tomorrow, she will probably regret it. When Yayu turned around and returned to his room, at the same time, Yechian on the other side had just arrived at the door of her room, but she happened to see another girl from the same clan. She was wearing a lavender front opening dress, with a light purple thin ribbon tied around her waist, outlining the girl's graceful curves about to bloom, with a beautiful face and a faint smile, and an elegant and charming temperament. "Lingxian, what a coincidence." Yechian looked up at the purple-clothed girl and smiled. Ye Lingxian, on the surface, she is the second genius of the Ye family, but Yechian and Ye Lingxian have been friends since childhood, and she knows very well that her good friend is actually the real first genius. However, Ye Lingxian is usually low-key and does not like to compete with others, so most of the disciples in the clan only remember her appearance, but ignore her enchanting talent. Ye Lingxian smiled and nodded, then glanced at the small box in Yechian's hand, raised her eyebrows slightly, and said, "Has brother Yayu already refined the Chi training pill for you?" Facing a friend who has been playing together since childhood, Yechian hesitated for a moment, but chose to tell the truth, saying, "This is not made by my cousin, it was just sold to me at the original price by the eldest young master of the Mu mansion." Ye Lingxian frowned slightly and said, "The eldest young master of the Mu family, Musian. That Musian is not a good person. Why is he so kind?" "Did you give him the spirit stone?" Ye Lingxian asked softly with a crisp voice. Yechian shook her head gently and said, "I'm going to take the spirit stones to the Mu mansion tomorrow." Muzian is not a good person. Ye Lingxian frowned slightly and said softly, I'll go to the Mu mansion for you tomorrow. Ye Qian was too naive. She was worried that something would happen if she went to the Mu mansion tomorrow. Who knows, Muzian might show his true colors and use the power of the Mu family to bully Ye Qian. It would be safer for her to go. Others might be afraid of the Mu family, but she was not. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 56. Huang Manting wins. After hearing the clear voice from the stage, Lan Murian stood up and left quietly. If it weren't for Bairuoxi's move just now, judging from the few competitions today, the strength of the demon girl of the Dawn Chamber of Commerce would still be quite amazing. But there is already a pearl in front. No matter how well this beauty in a black dress performs, it looks much worse from the visual effect alone. After all, it takes a while to defeat the opponent, and it is completely different from defeating the opponent with one sword. Huang Manting walked down the competition stage, and her eyes immediately fell on the stone chair where Lan Murian had just sat. The examiner had left. It's no wonder that anyone who has just seen Bairuoxi's move will probably not be very interested in the competition with others later. Miss Huang, with your current strength, I'm afraid you are ranked in the top 3 in Tianqian City, a young man next to her came up and said with a smile. The top 3? Apart from the eldest daughter of the Bai family, Miss Huang's strength should be the best of the younger generation. Originally, according to the ranking in the minds of the cultivators, the strongest of the younger generation should be Huang Manting of the Dawn Chamber of Commerce, followed by Gongsun Cheng of the Gongsun family, and then Bairuoxi. However, Bairuoxi's move this time completely overturned everyone's thoughts. The power of that sword, I'm afraid only a cultivator in the refining spirit realm can take it head on. Huang Manting glanced charmingly at the young men who were catering to her, and said in a lazy voice, we haven't fought yet, and it's hard to say now. The bronze sword that Bairuoxi sacrificed at that time was indeed amazing, but as long as he could avoid it, he would have the strength to fight. Gongsun Cheng was just arrogant, and he was so angry at Muzian that he was dizzy at that time. If it were her, she would not be so careless and take the bronze sword head on. However, it is quite surprising that Muzian would be with Bairuoxi. Bairuoxi had always ignored Muzian before, and it was not the first time that Muzian had been so eager to get close to him. In the end, he really succeeded in wooing her. And judging from Bairuoxi's reaction at that time, she looked like she was completely in love. Muzian. Huang Manting's eyes flickered slightly, and she became more curious. How did a cultivator of the 3rd rank of Qi training succeed in wooing Bairuoxi? Just with a face? There are many handsome young people who pursue the most beautiful woman, so it should not be this reason. After casually fooling the group of suitors around her, Huang Manting glanced at her subordinates and said lightly, go and check when Muzian had contact with Bairuoxi recently. Knowing yourself and the enemy can win every battle, no matter whether it is Bairuoxi or Muzian, she will definitely get the quota for the inner disciple. Mu Mansion. After returning to the Mu Mansion with Bairuoxi, Muzian first sent someone to send a letter to the Bai family, saying that Bairuoxi would stay in the Mu Mansion for a few days, and then ask someone to invite Bairuoxi to the side hall for tea. Then, he found an excuse to leave the side hall and walk towards the study. There was actually nothing wrong with Muzian's operation outside today. However, if Lan Murian had seen everything in the tea house at that time, the problem with this operation would be huge. It's not that Muzian didn't expect to be seen outside, but according to the original speculation, Lan Murian was the kind of home girl who stayed indoors, and it stands to reason that she shouldn't have left the inn so early. What's more, if it weren't for the senior people in Tianqian City, the tea house with an excellent view would not have known about it. How did Lan Mulian know the location of the tea house? Ever since Lan Mulian entered the city, Musian felt that something was wrong. Lan Mulian first stayed at the Dragon and Phoenix Inn, which had an excellent environment. Then, she went to a nearby tea house and found the tea room with a great view. Could it be that she was also from Tianqian City? Or did she have friends in Tianqian City? Musian came to the study room unknowingly while thinking all the way. He pushed open the door and saw two paper cranes resting on the table. Musian opened the paper crane and saw only one sentence on the letter, Mr. Mu, Lianji sect is different from other places. If you stay in the Qi training realm for too long, it may be difficult to become an inner disciple. You should work harder for yourself so that you can have a better future. These words carry some concern from the elders to the younger generation. It should be the paper crane sent yesterday. After all, judging from Lan Murian's attitude today, it is impossible for her to send a paper crane. Musian thought of this, spread out the letter, and replied, "Thank you for your concern, senior sister. I will work hard to practice and catch up with senior sister as soon as possible. By the way, the sweet-scented Osman Thus cake at Kai Inn in Tianqian City tastes good. If you are free these days, I will bring you some sweet-scented Osman Thus cake." After throwing the paper crane out of the window, Musian spread out another letter. "The fragrance of the snow lotus is good, I like it very much, but it withered not long after it was sent." Musian was slightly startled, and there was a little more doubt in his eyes. "I remember that when the snow lotus was sent to my senior sister, it was still alive and well. At that time, I saw the snow lotus in a vase." Thinking about it, Musian still waved the brush and wrote a small essay full of emotions on the letter paper. He could see that Lan Mulian was not as cold as he imagined. On the contrary, she was a little bit sultry. According to his original impression of Lan Mulian, she should be the kind of person who would not directly praise Swilian even if she received it, but she directly expressed her love in this letter. This means that he can further express his feelings for her. After writing two letters, Musian looked up at the two paper cranes flying in the air, and withdrew his gaze with satisfaction. Leaving the study and walking into the side hall. However, Musian did not notice that when the two paper cranes flew into the air, one of them flew towards the Yangfeng Inn in Tianqian City with fairy air, while the other quietly flew out of the city gate. By mansion, in the hall. "Madam, Master, a letter from the Mu mansion." A servant handed over a letter with both hands, and after Bai's father took the letter, he quietly withdrew. Bai's father opened the letter and glanced at the contents of the letter. He couldn't help but frowned and said, "Nonsense, a grown-up girl doesn't stay in her own boudoir, but goes to live in someone else's house, and plans to stay there until the sect assessment officially begins." The beautiful woman put down the teacup gently and said faintly, "This is probably what Musian meant. Ruoxi has been obedient and smart since childhood, and is not the kind of person who would make decisions on his own." Father Bai was furious, as if his cabbage was being pushed by a pig. His face was ashen, and he punched the table. Sawdust flew everywhere, and the table legs collapsed immediately. The servants outside were startled and looked over subconsciously. The beautiful woman sat upright, as if she was used to it, waved her hand, and said, "You can leave, there is nothing going on here, don't worry about it." After the servants left, Bai Yuanfeng looked at the angry father Bai, sighed, and said, "Master, aren't you surprised how the eldest young master of the Mu family discovered the evil spirit on me at that time?" The crude warrior had no brains at all, and when he was asked this question, his brain crashed directly. Deep in the Bai family, the barrier can shield the demonic energy. Even if I leave and go outside, it is difficult for anyone other than a land immortal to detect the demonic energy in me from the mixed spiritual energy. Bai Yuanfeng crossed her legs and said faintly, "But there are exceptions to everything. The heavenly qi on the boy from the Ye family can purify the spiritual energy around and directly absorb it into the body. After the mixed spiritual energy disappears, the demonic energy will naturally appear. Father Bai gradually calmed down. After pondering for a long time, he said, "Madam, do you mean that the heavenly chi is on Musian?" He quickly shook his head. Impossible. Gongsun Xiong and others secretly tested Musian at that time. If he had the heavenly chi on him, he would have been discovered long ago. It takes some time to refine the heavenly chi. At that time, time was tight in the Dragon Head Forest, and Musian had no time to refine the heavenly chi at all. Bai Yuanfeng suddenly asked, "What if the heavenly chi is not in the Mu family kid's body? Could it be that the enemy who took away the heavenly chi is hiding in the Bai family, deliberately wanting to expose the lady?" Bai's father frowned, "But hiding in the Bai family without being noticed, is there really such a person?" Bai Yuanfeng glanced at Bai's father lazily, and seemed a little tired of explaining, and sighed, "Does our daughter need to hide deliberately when she lives in the mansion?" "Of course, my daughter doesn't need to." Bai's father was suddenly stunned, and finally reacted. He turned his head subconsciously and said, "You mean, Musian gave the heavenly chi to Ruoxi? Only this possibility can explain why my demonic energy was exposed in the Bai mansion at that time," Bai Yuanfeng said. Father Bai's face was obviously a little strange, and he said, "What does Musian want to do? Can he even give away something like this?" Then, his originally sullen face suddenly eased a lot, and he said, "If that's the case, if you hand Ruoxi over to Musian, you can be assured. Even the chi of heaven can be given to Bai Ruoxi, which is enough to show how much Musian likes her. It's a pity that Musian's realm is too low after all. If he and Bai Ruoxi are both at the 9th level of chi training, they would be a perfect match made in heaven." Father Bai couldn't help feeling a little regretful. By the way, the Bai family should not be able to swallow up part of the Gongsun family's industry, Bai Yuanfeng suddenly said. Father Bai was startled and said, "Didn't you say that Tongmei pills have been given to Gongsun Xiong? Gongsun Xiong will be severely injured, but the task of annexing part of Gongsun's industry will be handed over to Mu's family, and we want to help." Before Father Bai could speak, Bai Yuanfeng continued, "Musian's kindness to the Bai family cannot be mixed up with Ruoxi. The Bai family is the Bai family, and Bai Ruoxi is Bai Ruoxi. If Bai Ruoxi is tied to the Bai family, it is certainly possible, and Musian should not say anything, but this will eventually deteriorate the relationship between his daughter and Musian. Therefore, let Tongmei pills be given to the Mu family in this way. Just as Musian said to Bai Ruoxi at the beginning. The Bai family gives benefits that can make the Mu family excited, and the Mu family can save the Bai family. The benefits obtained from the Gongsun family are the benefits that can make Musian, or in other words, the benefits that can make the Mu family excited. Now, the Bai family has fulfilled its promise. It's just, not only the huge profits brought by Tongmei pills, but also Bai Ruoxi's heart was abducted by someone. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 57. After ordering the servants to tidy up the room for Bai Ruoxi, Musian personally led Bai Ruoxi to the direction of the guest room. Bai Ruoxi followed him in her cloud-embroidered short boots and fluttering white skirt. She raised her eyes slightly, looked at the young man leading the way in front, and said softly, "I have lived in the Mu family before, so there is no need to trouble you to bring me here, you can go and do your business." Musian immediately shook his head and said firmly, "No, since I am a guest in the Mu family, if I don't treat them well, my parents will scold me for not treating guests well if they know." Bai Ruoxi looked at Musian with some entanglement. She always felt that Musian had some ill intentions, but she couldn't bear to ask him to leave directly, for fear of hurting his heart. In the end, she had to hold back what she wanted to say in her heart and followed him silently. Soon, Musian led Bai Ruoxi to a quiet room in the backyard, opened the door, turned around and smiled, "This is your room from now on. You can use the energy of heaven to purify your spiritual energy here without worrying about being discovered." Bairuoxi nodded reservedly, entered the house, poured a cup of tea for Musian, and suddenly worried, I don't know what's going on with my mother. Sure enough, she still feels insecure in someone else's home. Musian comforted softly, don't worry, I have written a letter to your father. If you don't agree, they would have sent someone to pick you up, right? Bairuoxi's frown relaxed a lot after hearing this, and she said softly. Then, she thought of what happened today and suddenly asked, what should I do with Gongsun Cheng? Now is the time when the Bai family is rising again, and Bairuoxi is still a little worried that Gongsun Cheng's affairs will affect her family. Sometimes, no matter how strong one is, one will be timid because of many things. If it weren't for Musian today, Bairuoxi probably wouldn't have seriously injured Gongsun Cheng anyway. Musian played with the teacup in his hand, looked up at the worry on the beauty's face, and smiled, since you are worried about the Bai family, why did you fight him at that time? Bairuoxi hesitated for a long time, and seemed a little difficult to say. It was not until a long time later that the girl's voice, which she tried to suppress, came lightly in the room, you were behind me at that time. If she didn't take action at that time, the person who was injured would be Musian behind her. Such a thing must be avoided at all costs. If she said that she regretted severely injuring Gongsun Cheng, she naturally didn't have such an idea. But the other party was the first genius of the Gongsun family. He lost so much face today. If the Gongsun family retaliated, Bairuoxi couldn't help but have such worries in her heart. Musian gently placed the teacup on the table and smiled, don't worry, Gongsun Cheng can't affect the overall situation. For the Gongsun family, he is just a genius with good talent, that's all. Yes, just a genius. No matter how good Gongsun Cheng's talent is or how smart he is, he can't affect the overall situation. The Gongsun family can't take care of themselves at the moment, how can they still have the mind to retaliate against others? Gongsun Xiong probably wants the Mu and Bai families to forget his existence, and wait for him to recover from his injuries before making a comeback. Although he said so, Bairuoxi still had a trace of worry in his eyes. It is natural that Musian is not worried. Not to mention that Gongsun Xiong is seriously injured now, even if Gongsun Xiong was in his prime, he would not dare to openly retaliate against the Mu family, the biggest giant in Tianqian City. But the Bai family is different. Because Lan Mulian is in Tianqian City, Bai Yuanfeng is afraid that his identity as a demon cultivator will be exposed, so he naturally dares not to take action. On the surface, the number of Bai family's soul refining cultivators is really pitiful. If the Gongsun family takes advantage of this to cause trouble. Musian looked at the worry in Bairuoxi's eyes and suddenly said, Ruoxi, what do you think will happen if someone catches up with you one day and then makes out with you on the street? Bairuoxi's thoughts returned to reality. Hearing this, he hesitated for a moment and whispered, everyone will know, right? The fact that the most beautiful woman in Tianqian City has a Taoist partner is a huge shock to many people. Maybe it won't spread throughout the city, but at least it will spread quickly among those young cultivators. When Bairuoxi said this, he seemed to have thought of something. He was slightly stunned. His autumn-like eyes stared at Musian and said, what you did outside just now, was it for the Gongsun family to see? Yes, but not all. Musian said seriously, there are other reasons. Guess again. Bairuoxi didn't speak for a long time. After a long silence, he shook his head gently, I can't guess. Musian took out a bronze mirror and placed it in front of Bairuoxi. The mirror reflected the beauty's stunning face, wearing a white dress embroidered with plum blossoms. The collar could not cover her breasts. 2 strands of hair fell from both sides of her forehead and rested on her full chest. She looked cold and elegant, like a weak young lady who lived in seclusion. Did you guess it? Musian asked. Bairuoxi's eyes flashed with doubt, and then, suddenly aware of the burning gaze of the boy sitting opposite, She immediately lowered her eyes and whispered, "I don't know." Musian's words meant that Bairuoxi couldn't help it because she was beautiful. Bairuoxi naturally didn't have the nerve to say such words out loud. Musian took the opportunity to hold the beauty's little hand on the table and said, "The chi of heaven can only be purified from the spiritual chi near me. If I want to meditate, I must be by your side. Can I stay in the room to meditate at night?" Bairuoxi was slightly startled and subconsciously looked up at Musian. His eyes were sincere and he could not see any lies. He said sincerely, "I will just meditate and practice, and I will never do anything bad. Besides, you are a 9th level chi practitioner. If I really do something bad, can I still beat you?" This is true. There is probably a difference of 3 or 4 Gongsun Cheng between the 9th level of Qi Lian and the 3rd level of Qi Lian. Bairuoxi's bronze sword can be used more than 3 times in a row. This is her current limit, and each sword is not of the same level. The enemy can resist. Therefore, there is at least 3 Gongsun Cheng differences between the 9th level of Qi Lian and the 3rd level of Qi Lian. Bairuoxi was silent for a moment. In the silence, she sighed faintly, "If I mess up, I can't guarantee that I won't accidentally sacrifice the bronze sword." The words seemed threatening, but also seemed a little weak. Musian nodded in agreement. He sat cross-legged at the foot of the bed, while Bairuoxi slightly bent her knees and took off the 2 snow-white socks on her feet. Then he sat cross-legged on the bedside, took out the chi of heaven, purified the nearby mixed spiritual energy, and transformed it into spiritual energy that could be absorbed into the body. Not long after, she suddenly felt a slight commotion beside her. When she slowly opened her eyes, she saw Musian sitting cross-legged next to her. She hesitated for a moment, but didn't say anything to stop him. After all, the floor is cold at night, which is understandable. But after a moment, she felt a slight breath fall on her face, slowly opened her eyes, and saw that handsome face staring directly at her. A trace of panic flashed in Bairuoxi's eyes, her voice was slightly trembling, and she whispered, "What's wrong? It seems that simply absorbing spiritual energy is a bit slow. I am born with a furnace, or I can try another method." Musian stared at the beauty's charming face and said softly. Bairuoxi seemed to understand what he meant and lowered her eyes slightly, not knowing whether to refuse or accept. Musian put his hands on her shoulders and said softly, "If you hate her, just push her away." While speaking, he gently pressed Bairuoxi on the bed behind him. Bairuoxi's eyelashes trembled slightly, and she half opened her eyes to peek at Musian. After hesitating for a moment, he gently hooked Musian's neck with both hands. Musian couldn't help but lowered his head and touched the girl's lips lightly, then leaned into Bairuoxi's ear and said in a teasing tone, "If you let everyone know that the 9th level chi practitioner was suppressed by the 3rd level chi practitioner, I wonder what everyone will think." When Bairuoxi heard this, her heart was inexplicably agitated. Her little hands subconsciously grasped the hem of her skirt, her back pressed against the bed, and she turned her face slightly away from looking at him. She was still fooled. Because the 9th level of Qi training, seems to be really no match for this little monk who is at the 3rd level of Qi training. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 58. A Silent Night. Gongsun Family. Gongsun Xiang slowly opened his eyes, feeling the pain from his internal organs, covered his chest, turned his head with difficulty and looked to the side, saying, "What is the situation outside now?" He was seriously injured and could not get out of bed, so the information from the outside world could only be inquired by his confidants. If possible, Gongsun Xiang wanted to add a hidden effect to himself so that everyone would temporarily forget his existence. There were the Mu family and the Bai family watching covetously outside, and the Chenexai Chamber of Commerce secretly trying to make a profit, and the clan members inside who were eyeing the position of the clan leader. Now Gongsun Xiang can be said to be at the cusp of the storm. Reporting to the master, after the head of the Bai family returned to the Bai mansion, everything was in order. The Bai mansion is secretly taking back its territory these 2 days. Gong Soon Seong nodded slightly. Although he was a little unwilling, he was seriously injured and had not recovered yet, so he could only turn a blind eye to this matter. The sect assessment will be held in a few days. How is Cheng preparing? Gong Soon Seong asked. The subordinate hesitated for a moment, looked at Gong Soon Seong carefully, and said, "The fourth young master had a fight with someone on the fighting stage today, and is now seriously injured." Gong Soon Seong's eyes suddenly became sharp, staring at the servant and said, "Who in Tianqian City doesn't know my Gong Soon family? Which cultivator in the refining god realm should have attacked Cheng Er?" Gong Soon Cheng's strength is one of the best among the younger generation, so inertial thinking makes Gong Soon Seong think that it should be a cultivator in the refining god realm who attacked his child. However, the next words of the subordinate made Gong Soon Seong slightly stagnant. "Yes, it was Miss Bai from the Bai mansion." The subordinate stammered. He didn't dare to say that Gong Soon Chen was not only defeated by Bai Ruoxi, but also defeated by a sword. "Bai Ruoxi," Gong Soon Seong exhaled slowly and said in a deep voice, "the Bai family has just recovered some vitality, and they dare to be so arrogant." Today, the eldest master of the Mu family seemed to be very close to Miss Bai Ruoxi. People near the arena said that the two were still flirting with each other under the stage. Gong Soon Seong was slightly startled. Then, as if he realized something, he murmured, "It's bad." The subordinate hesitated for a moment and was about to ask the master what bad he was talking about. At this time, he saw the man clenched his fist and smashed it hard on the bed. That useless person who is more likely to cause trouble than to do good. If it were normal times, Bai Ruoxi and Gong Soon Cheng would fight, but at this critical moment. Now the other party not only wants to beat the people of the Gong Soon family, they may also have to stand and earn the money of the Gong Soon family. Muzian is telling the Gong Soon family that the relationship between the Bai family and the Mu family is now unusual, and they should think carefully before taking action. Maybe they will come to ask for medical expenses tomorrow. And this medical expense, I'm afraid it's not as simple as a few thousand or tens of thousands of spiritual stones. The next morning, Muzian meditated in Bai Ruoxi's room for a whole night, and opened his eyes refreshed. The spiritual energy in the cauldron has increased a lot, although it is not as exaggerated as Bai Ruoxi. It has made him quite satisfied. He turned his head slightly and looked at the girl who was sitting cross-legged in front of the bed with her eyes slightly closed. Bai Ruoxi was wearing a slightly loose white single dress, and her white face was particularly beautiful in the dim light. Just looking at it this way, it seems that this is a girl with relatively normal development, but Muzian knows very well how great a human heart is hidden under Bai Ruoxi's loose robe. He has seen it several times before. Of course, he also felt the warmth of human heart last night. Although there is still some unsatisfactory feeling. In fact, Muzian felt that he was not an LSP, but he wanted to feel the greatness of human heart up close rather than watching from a distance. On the hanger beside him hung a moon-white dress, with a pair of snow-white short socks on the side, and a white waist ribbon fluttering slightly on the hanger with the morning breeze, which was particularly dazzling. Seeing that Bai Ruoxi was still meditating, Muzian did not disturb him and quietly left the room. He could clearly feel that the aura emanating from Bai Ruoxi was probably just a little bit away from reaching the peak of qi refining. However, he was still in the third level of qi refining. This natural furnace gave others buff and experience, but he didn't get any benefit at all. It was a blood loss. There may be no good person in the world who is as helpful as me. Muzian shook his head and sighed secretly. In order to help Bai Ruoxi enter the realm of refining spirit as soon as possible, he was also very hard-working. But it doesn't matter who makes him helpful. After leaving the room, Muzian saw Wei Mengru in a yellow dress in the yard. She stood alone in front of the yard, with a graceful back curve, as if thinking about something. Musian was used to it. In the past, he often woke up like this and found Wei Mengru alone in the yard in a daze. This maid has always been like this, quiet, not talkative, and only completing her tasks silently. Noticing Wei Mengru tilting her head to look over, Musian raised his hand and greeted her, smiling, "Sister Mengru, please spar with me. Just as a way to loosen up your muscles." Wei Mengru nodded silently. But when she raised her sword, she suddenly thought of something and said, "By the way." When Musian raised his head and looked over in confusion, Wei Mengru said lightly, "Remember to control your voice next time, the people next door can hear it." When she said this, her cheeks unconsciously turned a light blush, and she seemed to have lost her cold look in the past. Musian was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes slowly widened. I almost forgot, wherever I am, Sister Mengru will basically be nearby, so she should have been in the next room yesterday." Musian kept smiling and pretended to be calm, and said tactfully, "Ruoxi and I were just practicing normally last night. Did Sister Mengru have any unnecessary misunderstandings?" "Het." Wei Mengru glanced at him and gave him a contemptuous look, "Don't you know what you are doing?" I don't know why, this look of contempt, as if looking at a bug, makes people inexplicably excited. After discussing with the maid in the yard for a while, the voice of the servant suddenly came from outside the yard, "Master, the heir of the Ye family is outside asking to see you, do you want to let her in?" It seems that Ye Qian really cared about the Qi training pills after she went back yesterday, so she came here early this morning to pay back the money. Musian was not surprised by this. Rather, from Ye Qian's innocent girl's appearance and personality, he could roughly judge that she would care about this matter. After putting the sword back into the scabbard, Musian nodded slightly and said, "Take her to the hall to see the tea first, I will go to see her later." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 59. Musian went to his room, straightened his robes, and then tidied his hairstyle before heading towards the hall. It wasn't to leave a good impression on the girl, but he was the representative of the Mu family in the eyes of outsiders, so he had to pay attention to his image. Compared to younger people, Musian still prefers tolerant and generous sisters. Not only are they kind-hearted, but they are also able to tolerate others and are gentle and considerate. Musian stepped over the threshold and walked into the clean and elegant hall. However, the one who came into view was not the pure and sweet beautiful girl Ye Qian he saw yesterday, but another girl. If I remember correctly, she seems to be a descendant of the Ye family, seems to be called Ye Lingxian. She was wearing a lavender double-breasted small dress, her already somewhat sizable chest was slightly bulging, her skirt was printed with violet patterns, and her hair was simply tied up with a jade hairpin, with a wisp of black hair hanging down. Although she is still at the age of a young girl, it is not difficult to see from her side profile that this little beauty will probably be a stunning beauty when she grows up. The Ye family actually has such a beautiful girl? Musian was a little surprised. This girl's appearance is 2 or 3 points better than Ye Qian, whom I met yesterday. If she grows up completely in the future, she may be able to compete with Bai Ruoxi in terms of appearance. Ye Qian is ill today, so I came here for her. Mr. Mu, you won't mind, right? Ye Lingxian noticed the boy at the door, turned her head slightly to look at him, and smiled lightly. That smile was pure and sweet, and people couldn't help but feel a little good at first sight. She was guarding against me, and was quite wary of me, although she was smiling lightly. Musian still noticed the hostility in Ye Lingxuan's eyes. Although Ye Lingxuan's smile was pure and lovely at the moment, she was just a little girl after all, and could not completely hide her hostility. Health is important. Is Miss Ye Qian okay? Musian smiled. He sat down on the tea chair beside Ye Lingxian and asked the maid to serve tea. Ye Lingxian smiled and nodded. Let her rest for the next 2 days, her body should recover soon. After that, Ye Lingxian raised her slender hand, and a simple-looking ring on her slender finger quickly attracted Musian's attention. Xian grade ring? No, this seemingly ordinary ring is actually a ground-grade ring. This small Ye family can actually produce a ground-grade ring? Ye Lingxian took out an exquisitely crafted sandalwood box from the ring and placed it on the table. This is the spiritual stone that Jianer used to buy the qi training pills. The cost of the medicinal materials and the cost of refining the pills are all here. Musian opened the sandalwood box and took a look, then shook his head and smiled. Just the cost of the qi training pills is enough, the cost of refining the pills is not necessary. Miss Lingxian should know that Mr. Ren of my Mu family is an alchemist, right? For him, refining a qi training pill is just a piece of cake. After saying that, he took away half of the spiritual stone, and then returned the box containing the other half of the spiritual stone to Ye Lingxian. Ye Lingxian frowned slightly. To be honest, she gave 2 fees because she didn't want Ye Qian to owe Musian a favor. If Musian used this to make a fuss in the future, the simple Ye Qian might fall into his clutches. But seeing Musian's gentle smile and sincere eyes at this time, she couldn't refuse, so she had to silently take the box and put it back into the ring. After a moment of silence, she broke the silence and said, Mr. Mu, Jianer is a very simple girl. If possible, please don't disturb her in the future. Musian laughed dumbly. I have never forced anyone in the past. You seem to have misunderstood me too deeply. Lingxian doesn't care about Mr. Mu's affairs. Ye Lingxian changed her tone and said, however, you asked Brother Ye to go to the Dragon Head Forest and used him to encircle and suppress one of the demon cultivators under the 7th seat of Bizhu. Isn't this a fact? Musian's heart trembled. He took a sip of the teacup calmly and secretly looked at Ye Lingxian, who was elegant and calm. She even knew about the 7th seed. This girl doesn't seem to be as simple as imagined. The Ye family can only be regarded as a second-tier force in Tianqian City. At present, only Bai Yuanfeng and Musian know about the 7th seed. Where did Ye Lingxian get the news? In fact, I have no interest in the affairs of demon cultivators or even the affairs of the 7th seed. Lingxian doesn't care what Master Mu's purpose is. Ye Lingxian took a sip of tea, put down the teacup gently, and said lightly, I just hope that Master Mu will not disturb Jianer. If possible, I also hope that there will be no conflict with Brother Ye. Your brother Ye has become so crazy, it's not like I want to have any conflict with him. All he says to me all day is, come to 1v1 solo, and call me dad if you lose. Musian smiled and said, I'm afraid this is not something I can decide. If you have asked, you should know that I have never taken the initiative to provoke Master yet. Ye Lingxian frowned slightly, obviously knowing that what Musian said was true. She asked someone to investigate Musian's affairs, and also found out about several conflicts between Musian and Ye. In all the conflicts, Ye provoked first. They are not right in this matter. But, Brother Ye's affairs don't matter. As long as Jianer won't be cheated by this person. Ye Qian and she grew up together. To Ye Lingxian, Ye Qian is like a younger sister. As a sister, she naturally has to take care of her younger sister. As for Brother Ye, she can help him if she can, but if not, she can't do anything. Since Ye became a waste, there has been no contact between them. It's not that Ye Lingxian or Ye Qian didn't communicate with Ye, but Ye, who became a waste at that time, was so inferior that he was almost autistic and refused to communicate with anyone. It was not until this year when his talent returned that he slowly came out of autism and had some communication with the tribe members. However, Ye seemed to think that these people didn't want to pay attention to him when he became a waste, and it was a flattery to him to have some communication after his talent returned, so he often showed a cold attitude towards them. Little did he know that it was not that everyone was snobbish, but that Yayu, who was completely autistic at that time, was completely unwilling to communicate with others, which led to the current situation. From beginning to end, no one looked down on Yayu. It was Yayu himself who looked down on himself at that time. If possible, Ye Lingxian naturally still hopes that the people who grew up together can live well, but during this period of time, Yayu has been obsessed with the matter of his fiancée breaking off the engagement. Such repeated autism is naturally a bit annoying. If Miss Bai hadn't broken off the engagement, brother Yayu wouldn't be like this now, Ye Lingxian suddenly said. Musian said with a ha and laughed, then if Miss Lingxian, you are my fiancée, and you don't like me very much, would you want to marry me or break off the engagement? Who wouldn't just blame others for their mistakes? But if something really happens to you, can you make the so-called correct choice in your own ideal? Ye Lingxian was silent for a long time. After a long time, she held the teacup in her little hand, lowered her head slightly and looked at her toes, and said, sorry, it seems that I thought too simply. Come to think of it, Bai Ruoxi's marriage was a baby marriage arranged by her parents when she was a child. Now that she has grown up, she doesn't want such a marriage and chooses to break off the engagement. Is it wrong? Maybe it was wrong, but if this happened to her, she would make the same choice as Bai Ruoxi. Which girl doesn't want to have a beautiful pink romance? No one wants to be arranged to marry someone from the beginning, and then follow the established path to the end, marrying someone they don't like. Thinking of this, Ye Lingxian felt relieved. One of the reasons why she had a very bad impression of Musian was because Bai Ruoxi broke off the engagement. But now that she thinks about it, Bai Ruoxi's behavior is understandable. Ye Lingxian raised her head slightly, her moist eyes stared at Musian, and said sincerely, I benefited a lot from coming to Mu's house this time. Lingxian has something to do later, so I will visit you another day. She thought that Musian was a boastful and evil young man who was obsessed with beauty as the outside world rumored, but after today's contact, the rumors seemed to be just rumors. At least Musian showed that he was more like a kind and gentle brother next door. Musian smiled and said, I'll take you out. Although Ye Lingxian was still a little wary of him, at least she was not as hostile as she was at the beginning. That was enough. Looking at the girl turning around and leaving gracefully, and her slender back, Musian thought for a moment, took out a snow lotus from the vase beside him, and followed slowly. After sending her to the door of the Mu mansion, Musian put the snow lotus in her hand. Ye Lingxian looked up at him in surprise. Musian smiled and said, Miss Lingxian, don't worry about human feelings. The snow lotus represents loyalty and purity of feelings. I just think this flower is suitable for you. This didn't sound like sweet talk, but just pure praise. No one hates others' praise, and Ye Lingxian is the same. Her eyes softened a little, and she nodded slightly to Musian with reserve, walked down the stairs gracefully, and walked into the carriage. When the carriage slowly drove away from the Mu mansion, Musian retracted his gaze. Ye Lingxian was very smart and vigilant. A frivolous attitude or even a show of kindness to her would only cause the other party to be vigilant or even disgusted. But if it penetrated silently like water, she would not be disgusted. At least after today's contact, her hostility was not so great. Moreover, Ye Lingxian was so vigilant about herself, what about Ye Qian? But this kind of thing can't be rushed, just proceed step by step. Besides, in fact, Musian had no interest in beautiful girls, but simply wanted to test what the power behind Ye Lingxian was. From the words and deeds just now and even the information she knew, it can be confirmed that Ye Lingxian is definitely not just a descendant of the Ye family. Musian turned back to the mansion while thinking about such things. When passing by the lotus pond, he paused slightly, thought for a while, stepped forward to pick a snow lotus, and then walked towards Bai Ruoxi's room. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 60. The carriage stopped at the gate of the mansion, and Ye Lingxian got off the carriage with her skirt lifted. Walking into the backyard, you can occasionally see clansmen sparring in groups of 3 or 2. The young men in the clan who were sparring noticed Ye Lingxian's presence, and for a moment they seemed to have been injected with chicken blood. The casual sparring suddenly became much more serious, and the spiritual energy on their bodies burst out. Although the realm was not high, from the atmosphere, people who didn't know might have thought it was a duel between top masters, and the Great Way was wiped out. While sparring, the young men's eyes were involuntarily attracted by Ye Lingxian. Although the girl has always been very low-key, the disciples of the Ye family ranked Ye Lingxian's beauty first in their hearts, and they admired this girl very much. In response to these gazes, Ye Lingxian just smiled, and then walked into the corridor of the backyard with Suolian in her arms. At this time, under the shadow of the corridor, an old man in a plain robe quietly appeared. Ye Lingxian looked sideways. Although she was only a young girl, she had the arrogance of an empress. She looked at the old man quietly and said, "Old Wei, what can I do for you?" The old man called Old Wei shook his head slightly and smiled, "I'm just worried about the eldest lady, so I want to ask about your situation." Ye Lingxian's eyebrows were relaxed, with a faint smile between her eyebrows, and said, "Old Wei, didn't I tell you that I just went to return the spiritual stones owed by Yechian to the other party? There won't be any problems." Old Wei smiled and nodded, saying, "That being said, but Miss Musian's reputation is not unknown. When the master asked you to come to the Ye family, he specifically told me to protect you. If something unexpected happens, I will be too ashamed to go back." At this point, he realized that Ye Lingxian was holding a snow lotus in her hand, and couldn't help asking, "Miss, this flower in your hand, where did you pick it?" He remembered that Ye Lingxian went to the Mu mansion. Why did she bring a flower when she came back? Could it be that someone gave it to him on the way back? Ye Lingxian smiled sweetly, "Musian gave it to him." The old man was obviously stunned for a moment, and looked at the extremely beautiful girl with suspicion. He knew that Ye Lingxian went to the Mu mansion on behalf of Yechian today. If I remember correctly, when the young lady mentioned Musian yesterday, she still looked disgusted. How come after going there today, she seems to be less disgusted with him? Ye Lingxian hesitated and said, "That young Master Mu is actually not as bad as imagined." Old Wei was slightly startled. Before he could continue asking, Ye Lingxian suddenly asked, "By the way, do you know how to preserve the snow lotus for a long time?" The old man thought for a moment and said, "Generally speaking, as long as there is Liuguang soil, the flowers will not wither within 3 months even without watering. However, this Liuguang soil is relatively rare and the price is also a bit expensive, so it may be a bit troublesome." After a pause, the old man continued, "But if I remember correctly, there will be a batch of Liuguang soil at the Chenexai auction in 2 days. If the lady needs it, I will go to the Chenexai auction house again that day." Ye Lingxian thought for a moment, raised her head, and a pure smile appeared on her delicate and flawless face, saying, "Don't bother Mr. Wei. I'll let Jianer go with me. When I think about it carefully, it seems that I haven't gone out for a walk for a long time." Musian quietly opened the door and saw that Bairuoxi had changed back into her moon-white dress. The beauty sat in front of the tea chair, seeming to be in a daze, and seemed to be thinking about something. Musian felt like teasing, he held his breath and approached quietly. But just as he walked behind her, before he could speak, Bairuoxi's lazy voice sounded softly, "Mr. Mu, what's the matter with you sneaking behind Ruoxi?" At the end, she turned her head slightly to look at Musian, and her weak and cold temperament in the past seemed to have a different kind of charm. However, there was a hint of resentment in her eyes when she looked at Musian. It was clearly agreed last night that they would just practice in the room, but after a while, Musian couldn't help but make a move. If she hadn't kept a trace of reason in the middle, I'm afraid she would have to rest in the room all day today. Musian naturally knew the reason for Bairuoxi's resentment, and walked to her side and sat down. He took out the snow lotus from behind, handed it to Bairuoxi, and said with a smile, "Just now when I passed by the flowerbead of Mu Mansion, I happened to see the carefully cultivated snow lotus, so I thought of you unconsciously. This snow lotus represents loyalty and purity to feelings, which is very suitable for you." Snow lotus. Bairuoxi's beautiful eyes sparkled, looking at the snow lotus in Musian's hand, and then looked up at him again, and soon recovered, nodded reservedly, "Thank you, I will keep it well." As she said, she took the snow lotus handed by Musian, lowered her head and sniffed it slightly, and smelled a faint fragrance. "It smells very good," she whispered. "If there is a way to keep the snow lotus forever, it would be great." Musian took the opportunity to gently hold Bairuoxi's little hand and said, "If you want, I can give you no matter how much." Bairuoxi felt sweet in her heart and lowered her head slightly. Just when she was intimate with Bairuoxi, there was a slight knock on the door outside the house. Bairuoxi suddenly came to her senses and quickly tidied her clothes and hair. Musian, who was about to continue feeling people's hearts, had to stop. Being disturbed from a morning of special training, I was naturally in a bad mood. Who would disturb Ruoxi so early in the morning? No, it should be someone who came to see me. After Bairuoxi had tidied her dress, Musian said in a deep voice, "Come in." The door was opened, and a mysterious man with a hood on his head and an unclear face appeared in the field of vision. The spy of the Mu family. "Master," the spy said, and glanced at Bairuoxi inadvertently. Although the two looked calm, judging from the ambiguous atmosphere in the room, I'm afraid, it's not that simple. Bairuoxi seemed to understand what he meant, and said in a clear and pleasant voice, "I won't bother you anymore." Looking at Bairuoxi temporarily leaving the boudoir, Musian's eyes fell on the spy and said, "What do you want?" "Just now, according to the news from other companions, it seems that someone is secretly investigating you." Musian became more interested and asked, "Who?" "The Gongsun family should not dare to make any big moves during this period, and the Bai family is unlikely to do so either. After all, secretly investigating others is a very unfavorable thing. With his current relationship with Bairuoxi, there is no need for this investigation. Don Chamber of Commerce, it seems impossible. Mr. Huang is a smart man and knows what to do and what not to do. Could it be Ye Lingxuan's people?" Musian thought secretly. "It's the Don Chamber of Commerce," the spy said. Musian pondered, it shouldn't be Mr. Huang who sent people to investigate. Did his subordinates act on their own? Speaking of this, he thought of something else and continued, "Huang Manting. Yesterday he went to the martial arts arena, and the scene with Bairuoxi at that time was naturally seen by Huang Manting. That demon girl is thinking about the quota for the inner sect disciple. As the saying goes, knowing yourself and the enemy will ensure victory in 100 battles. It is not surprising that she would start investigating these important people around Bairuoxi." The spy nodded without comment, and then asked tentatively, "Do we need to stop her?" Musian shook his head and smiled, "Let her investigate, there is no big secret worth hiding anyway." He changed the subject and said, "Compared to this insignificant little thing, I have another thing for you to do." Under the spy's puzzled gaze, Musian continued, "Go to the Gongsun family and ask for some medical expenses. Yesterday's battle between Ruoxi and Gongsun Cheng frightened the young master and Miss Bai a little, and they need a little compensation. After that, the young master will go to Lianji sect to rest for 3 months, just say that," Musian said. The spy hesitated and said, "What compensation does the young master want?" 3 market towns," Musian said. The spy was obviously stunned, and then asked cautiously, "I'm afraid the Gongsun family will not agree to such a request. The Gongsun family only has 10 market towns in total. This young master wants to go to 3 directly." The Gongsun family is not stupid. How could they agree? The mental loss is not worth 3 market towns, but 3 months of breathing time is worth more than that, right? Musian took a sip of tea and said, besides, the Gongsun family will not agree, but Gongsun Xiong will. In modern times, Gongsun Xiong is a real capitalist. What is a capitalist? A complete egoist. The people below are eyeing the position of the clan leader. Gongsun Xiong is unwilling to give up the position of clan leader, but he does not want to be disturbed during this period. He has to pay a price. But I still have to go to the Dan Chamber of Commerce, Musian continued. If it were just the Mu family and the Bai family, Gongsun Xiong might hesitate whether to give the 3 market towns. After all, once the Mu and Bai families join forces, the Gongsun family will definitely bring in the Dan Chamber of Commerce. Even if they can't beat the Mu family, at least they can protect the Gongsun family and the Dan Chamber of Commerce. But if the Mu family brings in the Dan Chamber of Commerce, it will be completely different. Mr. Huang probably won't see anyone now, the spy said. Mr. Huang is a very shrewd man. The more times like this, the more he will hide. Even if Musian goes to the Dan Chamber of Commerce in person now, the other party will probably avoid seeing him to avoid suspicion. Musian played with the teacup in his hand and said, what about Miss Huang? Doesn't she want to investigate me? I'll let her investigate. Not only will I let her investigate secretly, I can even let her ask any questions in front of me. If nothing unexpected happens, as long as he goes to the Dan Chamber of Commerce, the news will immediately spread to the Gongsun family. Gongsun Xiong is now like a frightened bird. Once he sees the Dan Chamber of Commerce letting people in, he can't help but think about it. In 2 hours, you will go to the Gongsun family and ask Uncle Gongsun for the market. Just tell him what I said just now, he will agree. After all, he is a decent person. What if he doesn't want to be decent? The spy asked subconsciously. Musian gently put down the teacup, raised his head and smiled. If he wants to be decent, you should make him decent. If he doesn't want to be decent, then you should make him decent. After the spy left, not long after, Bairuoxi opened the door and returned to the room. Musian was sitting at the head of the bed, seemingly thinking about something. Bairuoxi turned around and closed the door, then walked to him and sat down, saying, what happened? Musian sniffed slightly and smelled a faint fragrance coming from beside him. He returned to reality from his previous thoughts and smiled, nothing, just thinking about how to start talking when I go to the Dan Chamber of Commerce later. Why are you going to the Dan Chamber of Commerce? Bairuoxi asked in confusion. As she spoke, she added, if it is inconvenient to say, don't make it difficult. She was just worried. If Musian refused to say, she would not continue to ask. Musian shook his head and said, it's not something that needs to be concealed. I plan to go to the Dan Chamber of Commerce later. As he spoke, his hand gently embraced the beauty's waist and smelled the fragrance on her body. The whole action was so natural that Bairuoxi didn't seem to react. She pondered for a moment and asked, are you going to see Mr. Huang? Musian shook his head, to see Miss Huang. It was obvious that Bairuoxi's body stiffened slightly, and it was not until a while later that it slowly recovered. She glanced at Musian casually and asked, do you have anything to do with Miss Huang? Nothing, Musian smiled, but you have to go. Going to the Dan Chamber of Commerce will make it easier for the Gongsun family to see. No matter what, you have to go there. Is that so? Bairuoxi lowered her eyes slightly, puffed her cheeks, gently pushed away Musian's hand on her waist, and said, since Mr. Mu has something to do, go first. I will continue to meditate and practice later. Musian looked at her profile. She frowned slightly and pursed her lips slightly, as if she was not very happy. Musian gently hugged Bairuoxi in his arms, lowered his head to look at the girl in his arms, and said softly, Don't you believe in my feelings for you, Ruoxi? The warm breath and gentle words made by Ruoxi's peach blossom eyes sparkle suddenly. She raised her eyes and looked at him mistily without saying a word. Musian also lowered his head and stared at the beauty in his arms. A girl as cold and pure as her, once shy, is simply charming and seductive, making it difficult for people to take their eyes off her. Musian lowered his head slightly, and his lips gently touched the girl's soft lips. He stared into Byruoxi's eyes and whispered, "Do you believe me now?" Byruoxi's eyes flickered slightly, as if she was flustered like a deer, but she had nowhere to escape, so she had to turn her face away and whispered, "I didn't say I didn't believe it." After that, he quickly lowered his head. Facts have proved that a cultivator of the 9th level of Qi training is indeed no match for this young cultivator of the 3rd level of Qi training. At least Byruoxi really has no way to deal with Musian. Seemingly feeling that such silence was a bit embarrassing, she raised her head slightly and was about to speak, but she happened to meet Musian's eyes. The affectionate eyes attracted her eyes involuntarily. Byruoxi pursed her lips slightly, with a hint of nervousness and expectation in her heart, and closed her eyes slightly, as if waiting for something. Musian also understood what she meant, so he lowered his head again and occupied the girl's lips. After a long time, their lips parted. Byruoxi gently pushed Musian away, buried her face, and whispered, "Okay, go and do your thing. I'm going to meditate and practice during the day." Musian looked at the girl affectionately and said seriously, "No, how can a cultivator like me be lazy during the day?" Byruoxi rolled her eyes at him, and after a moment of silence, she suddenly said, "Won't it waste your time?" For some reason, feeling Musian's fiery gaze, she felt a little panic in her heart, and her little hand gently grasped the fabric of the skirt. Musian looked serious and said, "In order for you to enter the realm of refining the spirit as soon as possible, there is no delay. Everything is worth it, Ruoxi." Half an hour later, Musian sat in front of the bronze mirror, tidying his hair. Then, he looked back at the girl who seemed to be resting in the quilt, and said, "I'll go out first." Byruoxi never spoke, covered with the quilt, like an ostrich. After a long while, she said softly. Musian left the room refreshed, asked someone to prepare a carriage, and headed to the Dawn Chamber of Commerce.